Good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the International Mountmakers Forum. I'm Elizabeth Soriano, and I'm a Mountmaker in the Antiquities Conservation Department at the Getty Villa. Before we kick things off today, I have a couple of reminders. Please silence your cell phones. And if you have a question for our speakers, please use the mics so everyone, especially those in our virtual audience, can hear you. And if you drove today, please bring your parking pass to get it validated at the check-in table. And also, please wear your name badge at all times while you're on site. So for those in our virtual audience, sorry, I lost my place. For those of you in our virtual audience, your camera, when you join, your camera will be automatically disabled and your microphone will be muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A tab. Shelley Euler is manning the Q&A section today from the back row in the house, and she'll ask the questions live. To enable closed captioning, click on the CC button at the bottom of your screen and choose Enable Auto Transcription. Okay, yesterday was great, so today is also going to be wonderful. But I want to start things off today with remarks from Jane Bassett, the Senior Conservator and Head of the Department of Decorative Arts Conservation here at the Getty, and Suzanne Gensica, Senior Conservator and Head of the Department of Antiquities Conservation at the Getty Villa. I also want to thank both of them for their support as we planned this conference. And I'm not sure who's speaking first. Are you coming together? All right, thank you. Jane?
So welcome everybody to day 2 of the 2022 International Mountmakers Forum. I wanted to start by thanking everybody for their contributions yesterday, and that's really from the depths of my heart. Thank you for your contributions and for being here, whether you're here in person or on Zoom. All of your work is inspiring, and the talks were beautifully presented yesterday. And equally important, a huge shout out to everyone for your active participation in the Q&A sessions, both those of you here in attendance and those in our impressive Zoom audience. So I look forward to more of that today. And I'd like to recognize the efforts of the local committee who have helped since 2020 to put this conference together twice. First, I'd just like to say thank you to Mac Lowry for his early efforts in what was going to be a September 2020 meeting until COVID hit. Mac is in private practice now, but we're happy to see you here in attendance. And Mac, I haven't seen you this morning. I hope you're here.
I don't think he's here today.
Oh, Mac, okay. Maybe you're here remotely. But my deepest admiration and thanks go to Getty Mountmakers Elizabeth Soriano, BJ Farrar, and Richard Hards for your many efforts over the months to make this fantastic event a reality. And cheers to the 3 of you. That's it from me. I'd just like to bring up Suzanne.
Good morning and a warm welcome from Antiquities Conservation. Thank you, Jane. I wholeheartedly second everything you said. And I would like to take this moment to introduce you to a 4th Getty Mountmaker, Timothy Scornia, who joined our team in August. Jane didn't mention him, so I could specially point him out. We are so grateful he joined our team, and he was thrown into the thick of things here, and many of you know him from his earlier contributions to the Mountmaker Forum and as a colleague in general. To set the framework for today, allow me a brief anecdote, a personal story. I would like to take you back to January 1980. Some of you weren't around then. To West Berlin and to the small Egyptian museum, which was world famous for holding the bust of Queen Nefertiti. The institution was ready to receive the traveling treasures of Tutankhamun, and they lacked some technical personnel. I was a kid straight out of high school and a volunteer. And as the museum readied itself to receive these amazing treasures, they teamed me up with Egyptian couriers, and now get this, was a Mountmaker from the Metropolitan Museum who had accompanied Tut's treasures on their journey. His name was Jeffrey Perhacs, and I believe some of you know him. He sadly passed away years ago. But I spent pivotal weeks with him, watching every move, his installations, handling of the artwork, and it was life-changing. I became deeply enamored with ancient Egypt, museums, exhibition work, mound making, and with conservation. And with this memory in mind, it is a real pleasure to welcome you here. And it also happens to be the 100th anniversary of the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, which is being celebrated in Egypt right now. But going from the past into the future, I know there are a lot of reflections on how the profession is changing. Richard spoke yesterday about the contributions of mound making to the presentation of works of art, to their interpretation, to the enjoyment of visitors. And we know fighting gravity and having artworks float is an achievement. But mound making is so much more than that. It is integral to the conservation and long-term preservation of artifacts. Beyond physical protection, the importance of seismic mitigation. Mounds help to create or recreate the original intent, such as the Neolithic wooden walk that we saw presented by the British Museum yesterday, or ancient furniture recreated from small fragments through elaborate mounds that put them into their original position. Mounds can be integral to conservation treatments. They can allow handling, rigging, installation, provide structural stability to objects. There are new technologies such as 3D printing, sharing of digital files, and some of you may have seen Rick Hard's, our Rick's presentation on really interesting work we did with the Antikensammlung in Berlin this year to create a mount for one of their very precious objects through digital file sharing. And there are many other advances. There will be talks about magnets today. I really look forward to everything that we're going to hear. But there's also an increasingly more inclusive discussion between designers, curators, conservators, and mound makers. And I think meetings such as this provide a forum for really in-depth conversations and reflections that are enriching everybody in the museum world. So I wish you a wonderful day with rich professional and personal experiences. I will see you throughout the day, and at the reception, I believe we will get lucky and have one of those wonderful Los Angeles sunsets. So with this, I will hand it over to Elizabeth and let the program begin. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thanks, Jane and Suzanne. All right, we have several virtual presenters today for this morning and some in person. Our first presentation is Simon Philpott from the Tate. He's a senior conservation technician at the Tate, and his talk is dry mounting, wrapping, butchering this, sorry, dry mounting, wrap mounting for photos.
Hello, my name is Simon Philpott, and I am a senior conservation technician working in paper and photography conservation at Tate. Today, I am going to briefly talk to you about a technique that we have developed over the past 5 years for mounting oversized photographs at Tate. Over the last few years, Tate have continued to acquire large format photographs reflecting a trend in contemporary photography, with artists moving away from wanting to present their works in traditional window mounts. When Tate acquires such works ready mounted and framed, these have usually been adhered to a rigid support, most commonly Dibond, an aluminium composite sheet, using a process known as dry mounting. This allows the work to fill the entire space of the frame whilst remaining flat and not sagging over time. However, Tate are also acquiring many large format photographs unmounted and unframed. This can happen for a number of reasons, including a price being agreed between curatorial and the gallery or artist without factoring in mounting or framing costs, an artist or a curator not being aware of the standard methods used in mounting and framing digital and analog photographs, an artist or gallery not being able to afford the crating or shipping costs, or an artist choosing a poor quality support material. We've therefore had to develop an alternative method for mounting at Tate, which gives similar results to dry mounting. This method has become known in Tate as wrap mounting, and we have already successfully used it on many photographs in the collection, such as works by Zanelli Maholi, Vanessa Winship, Mary Yates, and Larry Achiumpong. So why do we wrap mount? Once acquired, we are no longer able to dry mount artworks for the following reasons. We do not have dry mounting facilities at Tate. We do not send collection works for external mounting and framing due to risks of damage and high insurance costs. Though the outcome of dry mounting is very stable, the procedure is not viewed as conservation friendly. Heat and pressure are applied to the photograph. There is a risk of particles becoming trapped between the photograph and support and being visible, and it is not reversible. These are risks which are negligible before the work is acquired, when any problems can be resolved between the artist or the gallery. But once an artwork is acquired, it is a very different scenario. In addition to not being able to dry mount collection works, our traditional in-house mounting methods, such as window mounts and photo corners, are not appropriate for these works for both aesthetic reasons, but also because the photos will sag over time. A few years ago, we began developing our wrap mounting method alongside our photography conservator, Laurence Martin. This method was built from existing literature, namely an article entitled Reversible Mounting Techniques for the Display of Large Format Contemporary Photographs from the periodical Topics in Photographic Preservation from 2007. This article described a method developed for mounting photographs based on the edge lining method used on canvas paintings. Our method not only differs significantly from this, but also develops a method for wrap mounting photographs on fibre-based papers, as well as on resin-coated papers. Our wrap mounting method consists of adhering Japanese paper hinges around all 4 edges of the photograph. We use RK17 Japanese tissue, which we are familiar with and has good strength. We cut the tissue into 5 centimetre square hinges with a single feathered edge. And the work is placed face down on a sheet of clean, non-woven polyester, above a sheet of blotter, and finally a piece of museum board. This allows us to move the work carefully when turning for hinging, whilst the surface of the photograph remains static against the polyester. And then we weight the work before we begin hinging. For resin-coated papers, we use as an adhesive a 50-50 mix of Lascaux 498HV and 303HV, which, when it becomes dry, becomes tacky, much like a post-it note. We place the hinge on a clear sheet of polyester and brush the Lascaux mix liberally on the rough side of the feathered edge, about 1 centimetre in. Before the Lascaux dries, we lift the hinge off the polyester and move to a clean area so that the feathered edge remains neat. We allow the hinges to dry in a dust-free area for 24 hours. When applying the hinges, we position them on the back of the photograph before gently applying pressure with a bone folder. There is no need to weight these. We continue around the perimeter of the work, overlapping the hinges in the corners. For fibre-based papers, we use a 10% solution of Klucel G in ethanol. We place the hinge on a scrap of mountboard and brush the Klucel G liberally on the rough side of the feathered edge, again about 1 centimetre in. The hinge is immediately turned over and attached to the edge of the photo. We press this down before applying even pressure with a bone folder. We continue adhering hinges around the photograph, attaching 3 to 4 hinges at a time before weighting these with strips of non-woven polyester, blotter, and perspex. These hinges take about 20 minutes to dry. Both adhesives contain no water, so will not swell or distort the paper, and they are easy to reverse. These are adhesives that we are familiar with. They are stable and have good aging properties. The adhesive bond may not be as strong as it would be with our solutions of wheat starch or methyl cellulose, but this is not a concern, as once framed, the edges of the photograph will rest against the spacers, which will keep the work in place. For the support, we use an archival honeycomb panel, which is rigid, has a smooth, even surface, and is lightweight. 8mm thick board is sufficient for most photographs, but on exceptionally large works, we use a 13mm thick board. The honeycomb board is cut 2mm bigger than the photograph, giving 1mm excess board on all sides of the photograph. Edges of the board are sealed with P90 archival tape to prevent the honeycomb becoming a home for pests. We wrap and tape the hinges to the back of the honeycomb board using pieces of P90 the same width as the hinges. We begin in the centre, turn over and check that the photograph is central before continuing towards the corners, much like stretching a canvas. Once complete, we add a full strip of P90 across each length of hinges, and the work is now ready to be framed. Here is an example of a work which has been mounted and framed in-house. This work was prepared for the Zanelli Maholi exhibition at Tate Modern in 2019. As you can see, the final result has an identical appearance to a dry-mounted work. As the spacers are in contact with the work, we ensure these are made from archival museum board. Here we have used a microchamber board which matches the finish of the black frame. We've not only limited this technique to oversized works, but any works in the collection which require the dry mount aesthetic, as you can see from these works by Larry Achiampong, which are on display at Tate Britain. Thank you all so much for listening, and I hope you have enjoyed this very brief talk.
I think we have Simon in the virtual waiting room. Yes? Thank you for that talk, Simon. Thank you so much for that talk, Simon.
Thank you for having me.
I'm sorry I butchered your title.
So I was just saying thank you very much for inviting me.
Do we have questions for Simon? How many, what's the largest number of hinges you've had to put on a photograph?
That's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head, but a hinge is about 5 centimeters long, so I guess that's 2 inches to you guys. So for a large work on paper, say 1.5 meters by 1 meter, that's quite a lot of hinges. I think it must be about 200 or 300 hinges.
Yeah, that's quite a few.
Hi, we have a virtual question. Hi, Simon. Thanks for being here. It's about the proportions of the LASCO 498 and the other one, the 300, for the resin-coated papers. If you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I think it's 303 is the other one, and 498. So we use a 50-50 mix, and you could mix that by volume, but we find it easier to weigh that. So we do equal weight of both adhesives, and that gives the adhesive just the right kind of tackiness, really. We're looking for something that holds enough, but is easily reversible.
Excellent, thank you. We have a couple more questions from online. How difficult is it to remove the hinges after exhibition?
As a rule, we don't remove the hinges. So the works that we do this to are framed permanently. So we're mounting them to be stored framed permanently. So the reversibility really is just from a conservation perspective. But they are on the resin-coated paper, they are very easily removed because it's a pressure-sensitive adhesive. On fibre-based papers where we use the Clucel, I haven't removed any. It would be down to one of our conservators to remove them, but I think they would reactivate that with alcohol to remove them.
Excellent, thank you. And there was one more question that was about in one of the pictures you had some of the weights that you used. There were some black tubular weights. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, we have, they're sort of a leather weight. So there were some disc weights and there were some tube weights, and I think they contain, I guess they're sort of lead shot inside a leather sewn pouch, is my understanding. We get them from a company called Preservation Equipment Limited here in the UK.
Excellent. And there's another question. Was there a particular order in which you secured the hinges?
When we're applying the hinges, not particularly. I tend to start from a corner and work along one side, and then just continue round, overlapping the corners. When we actually then wrap the hinges around the honeycomb board, then we start from the middle of each side and then move outwards towards the corners, because that gives a good sort of tension across the photograph, a bit like if you were stretching a canvas around a wooden strainer.
I have a question about humidity. I mean, have you had any, papers, distort in any way? Have you had any, humidity spikes in a gallery and seen the photos warp, or any sort of distortions due to humidity changes?
I think I can remember some where they did. There was some possible change during display. because I guess the difference is with the dry mounted work, it is adhered to a panel, so you're not going to get those kind of changes. But with this method, because the photograph isn't actually adhered to the board, there is room for the photographs to, slightly distort if conditions are not, perfect.
We have one more virtual one. Have you had to include pass-through hinges in the middle of the photo?
No, we haven't, and that's the kind of thing that we would do if we were float mounting a work on museum boards. Often we'll do we call them like a slot hinge in the middle of the work, because, for instance, perspex, the pull of the perspex can put on a very large work can pull the middle of the work out. But we found with this method, with photographs wrapped around honeycomb, is there's so much sort of tension in the work that we don't require any hinges in the middle of the work.
Excellent. The questions they keep rolling in. There's one more. What's the advantage of using many small hinges instead of longer strips?
That's a good question. Someone actually asked me that today, because I was demonstrating this to some of my colleagues. I guess, again, like if you were stretching canvas and you go from the middle outwards, if you have a large hinge, you don't get the same sort of tension. If you have many hinges and you migrate out towards the corners, you're kind of getting a better even tension on the photograph than if you had single large hinges around each side. It would be a lot more difficult. You'd have to wrap the hinge all around at once, and you wouldn't be sort of creating that outward tension along the edge.
That makes sense. Thank you very much. That's all the questions I have from virtual.
Do we have any more?
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions from the House? All right. Thank you, Simon. Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
Our next presentation is from Charlotte Park, the paper conservator at the Scottish National Gallery in Edinburgh, Scotland, and Sarah Lang, senior paper conservation technician, the Scottish National Gallery in Edinburgh, Scotland. And their talk is Mounting and Framing the 20 Iconic Plates from Jazz by Henri Matisse.
Hello, I'm Charlotte Park, a paper conservator at the National Galleries of Scotland, and I'm presenting today together with my colleague, senior conservation technician, Sarah Lang. Our presentation will outline the recent project undertaken to prepare for display the 20 iconic plates from Matisse's artist book, Jazz, for our current exhibition, Taste for Impressionism. Jazz was first published in 1947 as a limited edition of 250. Following the book's publication, an edition of just the plates was produced, and versions of both the volume and portfolio exist in a number of collections across the world. The 20 colourful plates are printed using a stencil technique called pochoir. Each plate is printed on a good quality wove paper measuring 42 by 65.5 centimetres, which is folded down the centre to create a folio page. In addition to the plates, the book also includes 20 folio pages of text, an index page, cover, and slipcase. The NGS copy of Jazz entered the collection in 1980, and since then it has resided in the archive store and remained in its loose-leaf folio state. It's typically been shown as an array of a select few plates within a showcase, with overall a limited display history on record. I was first notified of the desire to include this body of work in what was initially a summer 2021 exhibition by curator Frances Fowle in late 2019. As fortune would have it, global forces took effect and we found ourselves in lockdown with little else to do but contemplate, discuss, and research our possible options. The initial questions we faced were, would this be ethical? Would separating the plates from the volume compromise the artist's intent? Should the plates be viewed in isolation from the text? To what extent is the book format, the turning of the page, a part of the intended experience? Is this something that needs to be considered when deciding the framed aesthetic? Should this be permanent? What would the implications be on future access, interpretation, storage, and cataloguing of the object as a whole? And would this undertaking be sustainable? What would the impacts be on resources, both in terms of time and materials? For collection management and documentation purposes, and through internal discussions with cross-organizational stakeholders, we carefully concluded that jazz is a book, and that retaining this format was crucial to its integrity as an artwork. However, this distinction does not preclude the option to remove the plates temporarily for display or interpretation. This decision determined that any intervention to frame the plates should be temporary. And it confirmed that any reference to the original book format should be embraced in the framed presentation. For example, the central fold through each plate, the visual cue to the folio spread, was a desirable aspect to retain. It also called into question our cataloguing of the work. As a result, we overhauled how it is categorized on our collection database, with each component part now having its own accession number. And we improved digital access by commissioning updated photography that captured all the elements of the work as a whole. In terms of research, we found numerous image references online from previous exhibits around the world where the plates have been framed for display. You can see here examples including cropping the works within a window mount to float mounting in deeper box frames. I contacted two institutions, MoMA in New York and the Art Gallery of New South Wales in Sydney, for further advice on how they approached presenting jazz, and their shared experiences were helpful in setting our own aesthetic parameters for the presentation of the plates. For the frame profile and finish, our curatorial colleagues admired Sydney's white square section approach. They displayed the works in a fresh, contemporary style, which was in keeping with recent presentations of the plates in the landmark exhibition Matisse the Cutouts, hosted by Tate and MoMA in 2014 and 15. They also had the added bonus of fitting in with our existing style of stock frame, and therefore this project provided the opportunity and resources to expand and upgrade our suite of stock frames. With these decisions made, our technical brief was set to devise a hinging method that would allow for temporary but repeat display of the plates, allowing them to be floated within the frame, showing the edges of the work and retaining the 3D quality of the folio page created by the central fold. I'll now hand you over to Sarah to discuss our approach.
We began the technical discussion by exploring non-interventive mounting solutions, such as using magnets to hold the works in place or Melanex strips looped around the pages. However, we felt these would be aesthetically distracting in this instance and potentially unreliable long-term. The plates had to be mounted in such a way that they could be packed, stored, framed and reinstalled safely. V-hinges and wheat starch paste would be unseen and provide a strong hold, but it was not ideal to be reapplying and removing hinges depending on future display requests. With this in mind, we came up with the eyelet hinge solution for mounting. We would adhere Japanese paper eyelets to each plate with wheat starch paste, through which we could loop paper tape straps. These straps could be adhered to the mount board for display and later cut and released. The eyelets could remain on the object as unobtrusive patches, allowing the work to be returned to book format. And new paper tape straps could be made and looped through the eyelets again if the framing was requested in the future. We made multiple versions of the eyelet hinge, trying different shapes, sizes and orientations to test structure and strength. Here are some examples of our different tests. We slotted paper straps through and released them several times to test wear and tear of each eyelet. We settled on the one in the top right-hand corner, which is a slightly heavier Japanese paper, folded cross-fibre and slit along one edge. This eyelet hinge only requires a small area to be pasted onto the object, and the cross-fibre fold provides a strong loop to thread the paper tape around that is less likely to tear at the edges. We pasted 4 hinges to test sheets of similarly weighted paper, which we slot hinged to a piece of mountboard and left standing vertically for a period to confirm the sheet would not move or the eyelets stretch or tear. Again, we released and remounted these a number of times to get a feel for the process and check for wear and tear. We laid several pages down and found they rested consistently on the same areas. We chose 4 hinging points set into the work. These allowed the pages to hold firmly yet retain their book-like page structure. We created a template to help us uniformly cut 16 boards with slots and hinged each plate to consistent measurements. 4 of the plates had text pages printed on the verso. These required hinges made to half the size to be adhered to different measurements to avoid the text, and required bespoke slotted mount boards to account for the different hinge locations. When pasting, we fashioned Melanex applicators onto which we could slide the eyelet to paste 3 edges. Once this was pasted and placed, we slid a piece of Ramie through the eyelet and removed the Melanex applicator. Adhering the eyelets was a lengthy process due to the number of works, scale of each, and drying time required. After all eyelets were adhered, we cut 80 long straps of acid-free gummed paper tape, which we pre-folded, so that once threaded through the eyelets, it could be easily adhered back onto itself. We attached a strap to every eyelet. We threaded the long straps through the pre-cut mount boards, taking care to leave a little slack to allow the object to settle naturally. We wetted the gum tape and adhered them to the back. In this image in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see one of the plates finally mounted and retaining its natural folded structure. The plates sit pleasingly within our mid-range standard stock frame size. The frames were constructed and finished in-house, and their ongoing storage and maintenance will fall under the existing remit of the technician team. The wax gesso finish is far more labour-intensive than our existing moulding options. However, we took comfort in knowing the impact on resources. From this one project, both time and materials would have a life and use beyond this one display. The frames made in TrueView Optim acrylic glazing purchase can be used again for future requests, not only to display these plates, but other works from the print room collection. Here you can see an example of the finished result. To some extent, only time will tell the practicality and durability of our eyelet hinge solution. However, a methodical, experiment-based approach certainly reassured us as we worked through our problem-solving journey.
The real success for us on this project was the cross-discipline approach, bringing curator, conservator, and technician together to have an object-based discussion focusing on the ethics and artist's intent. It is down to this collaboration that we were able to devise a presentation solution that ultimately makes this important artwork more accessible without compromising its safety or integrity. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah and Charlotte. I believe Sarah is joining us virtually. I don't think Charlotte could join us today. Correct, Sarah? Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, hello. Yeah, I'm afraid it's just me today.
Thank you. It was a wonderful talk. Those are beautiful plates. Have you had to, since it's traveled all over the world, have you had to fine-tune any of the hinges or any of the framing?
Well, it's not actually travelled all over the world. It's we're only just deinstalling it from its first time on display framed, which is in our current exhibition at the Royal Scottish Academy called Taste of Impressionism. So it's being deinstalled over the next couple of weeks and then put into storage for a short period, and then it'll be reinstalled early next year for another display. So we've not actually had it stood the test of its first sort of 3-month display, but we've not had the chance to unframe it and turn it back into a book again and check how our hinges have held up yet. So hopefully sort of mid-summer next year.
Excellent, excellent. I misunderstood. Sorry, I misunderstood that. Do we have any virtual questions or?
Yes, we have. There's a virtual comment that was just speaking to how interesting it is and kind of wonderful that you, as part of your decision making, you were considering the experience of page turning as part of, asking that question, to consider is that part of what we should consider. So that was just a comment. And then there's a question about how did you decide how many eyelets to place and where they were placed?
Oh, well, the comment goes well with this question, because the big debate within the organisation was the ethics of mounting a book, of something that was always made to be a book. And so from the very get-go, the question of whether we should even be mounting it at all, that was the idea. The permission we were given to actually mount it up was always that it must retain this book-like appearance, and the idea that it is a book. So when we finally decided on the eyelet hinge, we sort of just naturally laid the pages of the book down to see where they wanted to rest. Because obviously the book's been held over time, and it's actually been on display quite a lot and looked at quite a lot as a book, and the pages do undulate. And the book, obviously, the weight of the way the book is stored, it's moved over time. So the placement of the eyelet hinges was based on where it naturally wanted to lie when laying on a flat board. And the reason we chose 4 hinges was the sort of 2 hinges at the top we placed horizontally to be the sort of weight-bearing or the load-bearing hinges, and then we placed 2 vertically further down to sort of retain the shape of the book. It's because the central fold contributes to the structure, to its holding its structure. We didn't want it to start sagging at the top and putting too much strain on the top hinges. So that's where the decision was, to put the 2 toward the bottom. So we just didn't want anyone to be able to see that there was even hinges attached. So if we'd put them too close to the edges, you would have seen it pucker where it wanted to pull tight.
Thank you.
We have
Hi,
a question
Sarah.
from the House.
Okay. So the point of the eyelets was to kind of be more reusable and not be constantly removing and re-adhering. So how is that adjusted, how you guys are going to store the plates now? Or I guess maybe you haven't come to that.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, that was it.
That was the whole point, was that the eyelets should remain on the object once we've unmounted it. So the paper straps are going to be cut off, disposed of, and the eyelets, the sort of they're almost transparent, Japanese paper eyelets stuck in the object. They'll stay on the 20 plates, theoretically forever, but obviously at some point someone will probably decide to take them off. And it'll be the whole object, the whole book will be returned back to its volume with the plates inserted in. And then the mount boards with the slots, the measured slots, they're going to be stored in a separate folder, which can be added as an accessory to the object on our database, and sort of pulled out and used as and when it's needed. So, the point being that its primary storage is going to be in the archive, kept as a book, as the object as it was intended to be. And any time if it's going to be put on display framed in multiple exhibitions, it might be stored temporarily in its frames, but that's never to be its permanent sort of state of storage.
Great, thank you so much. Our institution just acquired one of the portfolios, so timely.
Oh yeah. Oh, I'm excited to see how you tackle it.
Well, you know where to find Sarah. Her email is on our website, I think, right? So if he has questions.
Yeah, please get in touch. I'll have hundreds of questions for you as well.
So I had a question about the aesthetic of the open book. You said that you used 4 eyelets for each plate. Did you position one of those to keep the book fold in the center in position, or is that just done by the natural lay of the page?
Yeah, the eyelets were placed just based on gravity, where when the when the book's laid flat on a piece of card, the fold does want to sit down. And then there was sort of 4 other very obviously prominent touching points on the page. And we actually didn't have to do, the fold is so strong, it's been stored folded for such a long time, it's got such a strong memory in the crease. It really doesn't want to come forward or flatten out at all. But what we did is we made a template and we sat each one on the in order to centre it on the mount board, we had this sort of Melinex template, and we marked where the fold was, and we centred each plate to line up the centre of the fold on this line, so that the eyelets are the eyelet slots, when we went to cut the slots in the board, there may be slightly different millimetre measurements on each board. But it's sort of guaranteed that the central fold would always be in the centre of the mount board each time. I hope that makes sense.
That did, yeah.
Okay.
Were there any concerns about when it's reassembled in book form about the eyelets maybe catching corners as it was being handled?
Well, I hadn't thought about that until you just said it, but that's a good point. So I would say no. We hadn't. I think there's just, the eyelets are very soft. They are Japanese paper. They are quite quite centralised on each plate. So I think it would have to be quite, and they're also like, we store the book with the acid-free tissue paper interleaving each page as well. So they're not sort of stored, because obviously the book, although this is the first time it's been mounted in frames, it has been on display a lot and it is handled quite a lot. It's sort of quite a popularly requested item in our archive that the public like to come and visit, and the archivist always sits with them. They wear gloves and they do leaf through the pages. So I think we had the same handling concerns that we always have with the object, and we'd already put certain things in place to try and prevent damage being done to the book. I think we had a little bit of concern. This is why we mounted it up. Sorry, a dog's howling outside my window. But this is why we mounted up a few test pages, because we had a little concern about the sort of thickness of the hinges showing through the paper. But after doing the tests, we were quite satisfied that wasn't a problem. And the way the book sits, it's not. It's in its slipcase, and there's never weight on top of the pages. It's not sort of pressed together when it's held together. So I think we're pretty confident that the hinges would be unobtrusive and certainly wouldn't cause further damage to the object in handling.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions from the virtual audience or from the house? Great. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks very much.
All right. Oh, I need these glasses. Our next talk is from Demelza Watts, a senior sculpture and installation conservation technician, Kinetic, at the Tate Gallery in London. The title is Artwork Led Packing and Storage.
Hi, my name's Demelza Watts, and I'm the Senior Kinetic Sculpture and Installation Conservation Technician at the Tate. Packing that moves, supporting kinetic and dynamic works to account for change over time, unusual environmental conditions, and artist concepts. In 2021, Tate acquired custodianship of an artwork as well as the Mayan ritual needed to install it. This is a first for Tate, purchased at Frieze London in a conversation between the Tate Fund, the artist Edgar Callel, and the Kachagal people and his gallery. Tate has agreed to purchase custodianship of the installation as well as to support the peoples whose ritual completes it. The work titled The Echo of an Ancient Form of Knowledge, stones become sacred sites of ritual. The fruit and vegetables placed on top of the stones are offerings to the land and ancestors. The work requires a ceremony to complete it that is not performative, it is proprietary and private. The work cannot be considered finished until the ritual is performed by the members of the Kachagau, so Tate must facilitate this if the work is to be shown. A brand new method of acquisitioning for Tate calls for a different approach to packing and storage. These rocks are living, containing living moss on their surfaces. This is not an object that can be packed into a crate or buried deep into a windowless warehouse. Many of the questions arose. We needed to view these rocks as rocks, part of the land, nature, and our ecosystem, rather than static objects or props. This makes one reflect on how easy it is for the acquisitions process to detach us from the role that objects, living or not, play in society and community, viewing them simply for their materiality or fragility, rather than their context or identities. Through Edgar Hillel and the Kachagau people's gaze, we could reconnect with the rocks and moss, considering our roles as their custodians. The result means that we were able to pursue a secure place of storage for the work that has access to light and fresh air, allowing the moss and the rocks to be and rest, fluid and evolving, rather than a more conventional attempts to freeze or slow down the effects of time. Moving to growth in packing, it's becoming more common for works to be acquired that require adaptive packing that can react, support and change to the evolving shape of an artwork over time. An example of this is Buff and Bloom, Glow and Thumos by Daiga Grantina, made in 2016. A large-scale sculptural work, it comprises of 3 large sculptures, each 4.5 meters high. The objects are made of nylon, resin and lycra. Grantina is exploiting lycra's elasticity and strength and covering fabric with coats of resin, testing its shaping qualities to achieve organic forms reminiscent of the human body. This elasticity presents us with a challenge when packing. It's important that the works are well supported in storage to prevent unnecessary strain on the forms. However, in installation, this strain from the works hanging is a vital concept in the work, therefore must be allowed and responded to in their packing. This process of sustained stretching during install will change the objects, altering their form so the packing no longer supports them. This means that we had to consider flexible and adjustable methods of tethering and supporting the works, utilising padded seat bolts, securing blocks of plastizo in place with bamboo sticks rather than gluing so they could be adjusted over time, specking cases larger than currently needed to facilitate spreading. Providing support for the materials that doesn't influence their form over time is a challenging balance. More and more contemporary artworks are utilising flexible materials whose very structures can be influenced by packing, many of which are mixed media and unable to be rolled, too large to be stored flat. An example of this can be found in the installation of Anne Hardy called Liquid Landscapes, made in 2018, which consists of a sculptural installation with audio piece, programmed light and wind, with a footprint of approximately 10 by 15 metres. This walk-in sculptural installation is a sentient space, an environment that can be temporarily inhabited but has a life of its own, altering and changing regardless of visitors or time. One of the larger elements of this installation being tape cassette curtains hung in the space, catching the wind from adjacent fans. These curtains were up to 3.5 metres tall and 2.5 metres wide and needed to be stored upright. VHS tapes hang from wooden bars wrapped with foil tape that are hung off steel rods in the installation. Like Grantina's work, the VHS has a great memory for holding shape. In this case, the artist wanted them to hang flat without kinks, so that as they move in the wind, the light catches them smoothly rather than strips along the folds and kinks. The work arrived to us suspended in a short space, with the long VHS lengths gathered up in bags, so that upon install the tapes were visibly kinked from their packing. Although a great method to save space, the storage had changed the way the work would be read in the installation. Our solution was to suspend the works in larger transit frames, looping them gently over heavily padded bars to shrink the works enough to allow them to fit in conventional transit methods and through museum doorways, but minimal looping over battens was required. This allows the works to hang naturally with minimal to no kinking. The gentle curve enough to not impress upon the tape, as it is so often in our work. This meant the storage footprint of the work increased dramatically, but still remained manageable and accessible for transit and storage and display. Similar challenges can be found in another recent acquisition, Do You Like What Is Happening in Milpa Alta, a work by Fernando Palma Rodriguez in 2011. The work is a floor installation of a horse laid on the ground, struggling to move. The skeleton is made from wood and its face of metal packaging. The piece addresses the drastic effects of climate change and exploitation onto the environment and indigenous culture of Milpa Alta, Mexico, where the artist is currently based. Plastic sheeting acts as a ghostly covering to the skeletal form of the horse. This, alike the VHS curtains of Hardy's work, arrived folded up, taking on the imprints of those folds. A common occurrence with such works is that they arrive to us disassembled, flat-packed, in a way that is not sustainable to keep reusing screw holes or reconnecting dozens of electrical cables, meaning that not only is this amount of work not considered in the initial install, it is not always predicted in the packing costs and time. Looking at kinetic works like these as one object rather than a series of parts that can be disassembled is often vital to ensuring its lifespan, as the more electrical wiring is connected and disconnected, the more risks you have of damage and misconnections, which can result in serious malfunctions or permanent damage. Also, being considerate to the artist's style and concept further reinforces this. Although electrical parts and cables are replaceable, when we make changes to the parts of the artwork, we're making changes to the artist's gesture or the artist's decision-making process, like changing a stroke of a paintbrush or revealing. These things reveal the artist's hand and their methods of working. So to resist disassembling works for the sake of a smaller storage footprint means we can preserve these elements for as long as possible. In the past year of acquisitions alone, we have received 3 works requiring lead-acid batteries, this work being one of them. As you saw in the video, the head of the horse is lifted up and down. It is done with a simple winch that is connected and currently powered by a lead-acid battery. In this instance, due to the fact that the artwork is static in its location, i.e. not mobile, we can circumvent that by rewiring it so that it can be plugged into the mains. If needed for aesthetic conceptual purposes, we can conceal this within the battery's shell, after the contents of the battery has been removed by professionals. However, there is plenty of instances where this is not possible. Psalms by Donald Rodney is an autonomous wheelchair that was developed by Rodney in 1997 to attend exhibition openings on his behalf when he became unable to attend in person due to sickle cell anemia. Incorporating a neural network, the chair would wander through the gallery, intent on pursuing its own path, only to be ignored or interrupted by visitors standing in its way. This work is mobile, unlike the artist at that point, and indeed, sadly now after his passing. So maintaining this is of course vital to the work. Therefore, batteries are essential. This brings us to the challenges of storing batteries. All batteries have a limited shelf life. In the case of lead acid, this is particularly challenging to preserve. If stored in the conditions set for artworks around 20 degrees Celsius, this would mean that within 12 months of no charging, the batteries would have lost their capacity to be fully charged, dramatically cutting down on the amount of time that the wheelchair can run for. In short, reducing the amount of time that Donald Rodney could have vicariously attended art openings. Even if storing in the optimum conditions of 5 degrees Celsius was possible, this would still happen after 3 years. So if we want to give Donald Rodney the maximum amount of time at art openings as possible, we must store the batteries as batteries, not as art, or be prepared to replace them. As you can see in this slide, a battery left unattended will swell and leak. Not only is this dangerous, but potentially very damaging to the artwork it is a part of. I hope this presentation has given you a bit of an overview of the challenges faced in packing and storing kinetic artworks, showing the variety of artworks, materials and technologies that must be understood in that process. all in this case within a single year of acquisitions at the Tate, showing how an artwork-led approach is often vital to understanding not just the artwork's display, but how the artworks are cared for in storage, quite literally in Galal's case, thinking outside of the box. Thank you.
I think Demelza is joining us as well virtually. That's amazing. I think it takes a very special person to work with contemporary art. And do we have any questions from our virtual audience, or do you want to kick it off, or do we have any from anyone in the house? Comments even.
I was just curious about the sort of horse piece. How did you ultimately end up packing it? Was the intention when you're packing it to keep it as intact as possible, or were all of the elements essentially packed separately? And also, I really enjoyed your presentation. It's sort of, packing to me is mount making in reverse or in negative space. So I thought it was fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. The funny thing about kinetic art often is that the only mount making you actually get to do is when it's actually being packed, because when it's out on display, it's moving, and so it doesn't have a mount per se. But in terms of the horse, we're actually sort of speccing that for packing right now, because we've just been working with looking at its mechanics for the time being. But what we're going to do is pack it as a whole piece, because like I sort of mentioned in my presentation, there's a big issue with every time you disconnect wires, every time you disconnect parts, that not only do you get wear and tear from just, undoing bolts and undoing joints, but also, with the electrics, you can actually get to a point where then you have to replace the cabling, and then you have to choose maybe a new brand or a new make, and that takes on a whole new kind of visual language in the piece, which then can make that part really stand out, especially in the case of the horse, where it's also visible, and the sort of rough aesthetic of the wiring is very much a part of the sort of style of the work.
So I had a question particularly about the batteries. In a hidden, a part that isn't part of the aesthetic of the piece, when things become obsolete, lead batteries, old wiring that's hidden, is there generally a push to update those if they're not seen?
Absolutely.
Okay, so you would archive the old battery and then replace it with, lithium or new systems?
Yeah, exactly. So what we tend to do, because there's so much damage that can come from just misstoring or keeping batteries, because once they start to kind of go, there's a lot of problems. So what we tend to do is just keep a comprehensive log of what type of battery it is, and all the dimensions, and have document it really profusely, and then we'll look at sending it off to an expert to empty it, and then replacing it internally with either a newer form of battery, or like lithium batteries are much less volatile and much easier to maintain, or just looking at whether it even needs a battery. Because if the piece itself doesn't need to be mobile, then it doesn't need a battery. It's just a lot of times artists will use that because it's something they have around, or it's something that's familiar, because then they don't have to wire it into a mains electrical system. Whereas obviously we can sort of do that.
We do have a virtual question, which is about the living rocks with the growth and the other items on there, and how do you store those when they're not on display?
So what we've ended up doing is we're actually lucky that we do have some remote storage. So we've found a site within our storage facilities where we can have them stored in a position where they are in an entranceway, and so we can actually move them when we're working in that store to get some natural light and to get some kind of sort of humidity in the air and then bring them back in. It's sort of becoming a routine in our storage now, that they kind of get a little, almost like a walk, I guess. And they're stored in, they're sort of stored in trays so that they're exposed to natural light and they're exposed to humidity, and they get a little bit of water spray every so often.
Excellent, thank you.
So I have a question coming from a background of kinetic art, and I have quite a few friends from college that also work in kinetic art. What would you say to, what would your suggestion be towards artists, if you could, to make it easier working in a situation like this?
I think, well, certainly one of our great assets at the Tate is that we have in-house electricians as well as myself and fellow conservation professionals. So what's really helpful for us is that we can write like electrical diagrams with the electricians, and then so we really have a record of how artworks work and what can be replaced and what can't. So I think to artists, I would say, if you can involve an electrician or at least someone who can make up an electrical diagram, and then really looking at which parts of the work are integral and which aren't. Because I think so often we're looking to preserve certain ideas, like, for example, you know, ideally we'd replace all bulbs with LEDs, but some artworks you can't. And when you've got to guess that, it's very challenging. Whereas I think if artists really can lay out their intentions, we can stick truest to that. So if they want the warmth of a old-fashioned style bulb, to know that's really important, because actually, if not, you know, LED, it's going to last longer, it's going to protect the rest of the artwork better, and it's going to mean that ultimately we show it more because it's easier to look after.
Do you sometimes need to update electrical systems for security matters, for display, especially when it's over 12 voltage installations? And how do you approach those kind of updates, since sometimes it's necessary to change the visual aspect of the artwork?
Yeah, for sure. Well, what we tend to try and do, so we try and consult a lot with the artist or the artist's estate as much as possible to get every agreement. Like we don't tend to work without agreements from them if it has an aesthetic concern. And then we work really closely with our in-house electrical team to then, you know, explain what we have to do to make it safe. Because that's, in a way, that's a simpler joy, because it's not like we're doing it for the sake of any other reason than that it is a legal health and safety point of view. So, for example, like all of our neons, we can't show them without having a visible stop circuit breaker button next to the artwork, which a lot of artists aren't very happy about, or curators aren't very happy about, but we have to do it because it's the law, and and because neons work at such high voltage, there's just no question about that. So it's a kind of similar approach when we work with upgrading systems, or if things are, because a lot of the time, you know, artists doing electrics is not always the most like health and safety conscious methods. So a lot of times we do have to tweak things and put in, you know, earth wires are a big thing in the UK, and we have to do that on all of our circuits because we work at 230 volts. And so it's just that negotiation basically, and trying to do things as sympathetically and as sort of understanding to the artwork as possible. But there is a simple line: if it's not safe, we don't show it. So in a way, we're liberated by that extreme measure sort of thing.
Hello. Has the wheelchair, I believe it's called Psalms, has that ever traveled?
It is about to, actually, yeah. We're going to be sending it to a few different places, but it's travelled to quite a few different places previously. It's only a recent acquisition to us, so I can't shed much light on it in terms of its history, but from our point of view, like we see it as quite a mobile artwork, both in terms of it traveling to different places as well as moving around itself.
Do we have any other questions? All right, I think that's it. Thank you so much, Demelza.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Our next talk is from Valeria Arena, paper conservator from the Ministry of Culture in Italy, and Claudia Giostrella, a PhD student from the University of Florence in Italy. Their talk is The Irresistible Attraction of the Magnets and the Large Format Works on Papers, the Experience of the Salce Collection, National Museum in Treviso, Italy.
Hello everybody, and thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to speak today. My name is Claudia Giostrella. I am a book and paper conservator, and I am working at the Italian Ministry of Culture from 1999. At the moment, I am a PhD student at the University of Florence, and the topic of my research is the conservation of large format works on paper. These kinds of artifacts represent a big challenge for conservators, restorers, and mounters. Finding properly storage solution, safe methodology for handling and designing suitable exhibition structures are the first solution to avoid causes of degradation and damages derived from mechanical stress. Very often these objects, which are not possible to be protected with a frame system, and we'll hear later from Valeria about pros and cons about this mounting, suffer from the wrong manipulations of persons not trained to handle large-sized paper artifacts, and from wrong setup projects that do not take into account the proper physical tensioning of paper. Most of the time, they were displayed on heavy and complex overestimated mounting systems, and the choice of materials used for lining and mounting reflected the painting restoration lining techniques, borrowed from the preservation of canvas paintings, without considering the different mechanical behavior of the materials. Only well-trained people and a specialized paper conservator that very often are able to move alone a large format with special tips and techniques should be employed to move large format on paper. The use of the controlled magnetic attraction has been widely used for the temporary mounting for works on paper. It is easy to use, sustainable, and very adaptable to the aesthetic needs of exhibition designers, and ideal for the large format works on paper, and in many cases can avoid the use of stressful lining conservation projects. During my research studies, I met Valeria Arena, Senior Paper Conservator at the Italian Ministry of Culture, at the Regional Direction of Museum in the Veneto region. Thanks to her, I discovered an example of proper and virtuous management of conservation and exhibition of the very big collection of large format posters at the Salce Museums in Treviso, a very beautiful city in the Veneto region, well known for the Prosecco Italian sparkling wine and the tiramisu cake. I was very well impressed by the extensive use of magnets in this Italian cultural institution, as very often the use of this alternative way of mounting of paper artifacts is still not very well accepted. Let me leave the floor to Valeria, who will tell us about her amazing job at the Salce Museum.
The Museo Salce in Treviso possesses an extremely wide collection of graphic advertising, consisting of 15,000 posters dated from the end of the 19th century to today. Because of the large number of works, a particular approach is needed in regards both to preventive conservation and to exhibiting them. As far as preventive conservation is concerned, the works are preserved and mounted in a deposit in contact with one another. Unfortunately, there is not the physical space necessary to interleave them with barrier paper. The desire to make the entire collection available to the public and the necessity of not having the works exposed to the light for more than 3 months at a time has led to the creation of a system of temporary exhibition in which the posters are rotated and never shown in a permanent manner. Furthermore, the large number of loan requests aids the museum in spreading the knowledge of its collection outside his own exhibition halls. It was necessary to find the best system to exhibit the works both for internal shows and for loans, because the works are moved in large quantities, usually 80, are large formats, and are not very common. In fact, the Museo Salce is one of the few museums in the world entirely dedicated to poster, and one of the most important in Europe for collection size. Working at the Museo Salce, I realized that exhibiting a poster inside a traditional frame creates confusion about the originality and nature of the work for visitors, who think they are modern-day reprints. Even mounting the poster on canvas, which corresponds to a more invasive restoration intervention, brings with it this ambiguity, because it mitigates the traces of time. Therefore, when I came to the Museo Salce 4 years ago, I started proposing restoration that did not call for canvas or paper linings and recommend avoiding the use of frame. On my arrival, the museum already had an excellent installed system which employed neodymium magnets applied to metallic walls. This solution has proved itself to be very suitable for frequent installation through use and over the years. In fact, it makes it unnecessary to repaint the walls each time and arrange for new exhibiting supports. Once the exhibition sequence is decided, all that needs to be done is to lay the poster on the metallic wall and block it with magnets on its perimeter. In order to do so, 3 people are usually necessary: 2 who hold the poster in place and 1 that ensures the work in proper tension. The magnets are temporarily placed in vertical position in case of any adjustment are needed. Then they are placed horizontal, starting from the center. When the format of the work is particularly large, an additional person can be useful so that they can gradually unroll the work along the wall. Usually, we use disc-shaped magnets which are 3 mm thick and 15 mm in diameter. These magnets, which are usually composed of neodymium, iron and boron, are always coated with zinc or nickel because the materials are subjected to corrosion. To isolate the work from the magnet's coating and increase the friction between the poster and the magnet itself, an additional paper or Tyvek coating can be added. The magnets we use have a high resistance to demagnetization, thus can be reused many times. If the strand of the magnet is well selected, and because it is so compact and thin, the poster paper will not be subjected to any deformation or impressions. Nonetheless, this may occur on canvas lining poster if the magnet strength is excessive. Outdoor exhibition spaces usually cannot be arranged with entirely metallic walls. Thus, metallic bars are placed in correspondence to the margins of the work. I always ask that the bars are not shorter than the work itself, so that an accidental shift of the magnets will not damage the extremely fragile paper of the poster. Other institutes have given different indication, I believe for aesthetics reasons. The thickness of the metal bars needs to be sufficient to allow the proper insertion of the screws which are used to fix the bars to the wall. A larger thickness could increase the risk of a breakthrough because an accidental collision, and it could especially cause the airflow created by visitors to excessively move the poster because of its distance from the wall. Obviously, the edges of the aforementioned bars need to be smooth and their surface inert. And now let me to talk to you about the pros and the cons of a poster exhibited with a frame and a frontal protection. Pro. Higher protection from collision, atmospheric particulate matter and UV rays. Cons. Possible necessity of paper hinge application and requires specialized equipment and knowledge. We have a different perception from the one with which the works was created. Posters were directly applied to building walls or to Morris columns. It can be challenging to build large format frames and passepartout. While a poster mounted with magnets has these pros and cons. Pro, easy to hang and to remove, fully and easily reversible. We have a similar perception of the work as in original wall display. The margins are visible. If the posters are composed of multiple separate sheets of paper, these can be jointed in a completely reversible manner. And we have the possibility of mounting works on curved wall. Cons. We have no protection from collision, atmospheric particulate matter, and UV rays. And in other contexts, such as with the architectural drawings by Paolo Soleri, for example, magnetic strips cut from plastic ferrite sheets were experimented with. These strips are commonly not used at the Museo Salce because the posters are not always flat and often present folds and other deformation. Reason 4, which is it safer to apply more punctual forces. Magnets have been used to exhibit works on paper at least since 80s. It is fairly versatile and safe, but in Italy, the most cases people will rather use the more traditional frames. We hope that the experience at Museo Salce will help spread this interesting alternative. For any doubts or questions, feel free to contact us or look at the loan guidelines on the website of Museo Salce, which for now are unfortunately only available in Italian.
I believe Claudia is joining us today for question and answers.
Yes, hi everybody.
Yes, hi Claudia. Thank you for your
Hi.
talk. I'm sorry,
So
Valeria.
sorry,
Yeah.
Valeria is not with us. So if you have any question about the Museum Salce, you can write to her. As she say, hi everybody, she has got a problem with Acqua Alta in Venice, so she's not here, she's at work now.
I have a question about the metal walls. Can you tell us a little bit more about those? Are they metal? Are they powder coated? Or is it magnetic paint? I'm just really curious.
This part, I think, is about Valeria, because I'm not working in a museum, so maybe it's better you ask to her. It's a new method. I think the museum was completely renewed just at the end of the 2018, so it's completely new. Also, this mounting system with the metal panels. But I can ask what kind of metal is. Sorry.
We have a couple of virtual questions. The The first one is, how do you apply the paper or Tyvek coating to the magnets?
This is another question for Valeria, but sorry. Yes.
That's okay.
I am just presenting Valeria.
I am curious to know, in your research, are you planning on developing about different interface between magnets and the surface of the works itself? Since some interface used like Tyvek and Millar tends to be very slippery. Can you elaborate about this, or is it in your plan to make further researches about that?
No, it's not on my topic, but it's very interesting indeed. Well, now I am working on some research on nanotechnologies and on the cellulose, nanocellulose. And I think it could be a nice, interesting materials for this, also for this kind of work. Well, I can ask to the scientist about this. But actually I use only paper, yes, Japanese paper.
We have a few more virtual questions. They may be technical, but please answer them if you can. One is, can you please describe how you store the magnets? I'm sorry.
I don't know, Valeria, how to store it, but in my museum, just one attached one another and on a drawer. We don't take much care about the magnets. I think we should do. That's a good question. I will ask to Valeria.
Okay, we'll have a list.
I think she has got a lot of magnets. So.
Here's another one. This person is saying, in my experience, these magnets are prone to pick up metal shavings in the environment. How do you prevent them from abrading the poster or embedding metal in the paper? Additionally, how do you remove magnets without abrading the paper?
That's a good question. Well, it depends, I think, on the paper and on the object you have. So in this case, posters are very smooth, is modern paper, mechanical paper, and I don't think, and they use a lot of magnets and not so so heavy with attraction. So I don't think there is so much risk about removing or mounting, and it is always for temporary times. So I think they don't have exposition more than 3 months, but this is another question to ask directly to Valeria. Sorry.
No worries.
Not helpful.
Yeah, there's another question that's interesting, and I think this is a Valeria question probably, but we'll add it to her list, has there been any issue with the visitors moving or removing the magnets if they have access to them?
This is another big problem. Mm-hmm. Well, in the Museum Salce, I think there is a person in every room. So you have to look at the people, especially in this period. And well, this is another problem. And you see in the museum, there are no separation between the people. So we trust a lot in people entering museums that are that have education in not touching and not being crazy, but sometimes
But there are no, if we put something on the front, it's the same as to have framed it. So they don't want to frame, they don't want a separation between the papers and the eyes of the visitor. Mm-hmm. It's a risk we have to have.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Great, thank you, Claudia.
Thank you so much.
Our next presentation is from Stéphane Pennec, the Director of INU Art Services in Paris. The title is 16 Years of Experience of Magnetic Mounts for Museums.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stéphane Pennec, and I'm the director of INU, a Mountmaker company providing services for museum and exhibitions. I'm going to talk today about the use of magnet and magnetic mounts for museum and the 16 years experiences that we have in that field. First of all, I would like to thank Gwen Spicer for amazing books. And this is a reference for the use of magnet. It's a source of information, both theoretically and practical. And I really thank her for that work. I'm not going to go too much into detail of things that she already explained perfectly in the book. So I will concentrate on our experiences and practical uses. The first time that I knew started to work with magnet was for the Musée du Quai Branly, and that was in 2006. And it came up that one of the issue was the turnover of fragile textile collection and textile and feathers, and due to light and UV exposition. So we had to find a way to have system that could be easily remove and change to every 3 months to change textile in the showcases. It was also the possibility of rearranging object within showcase, and finally some of the showcase and some of the presentation were very tight, and it was difficult to have access of the back for drilling and fixation. All that came up with the proposal that we made, or several proposals that we made to the Musée du Quai Branly in order to match with these issues, and we proposed to adapt the showcases, or to change the back and the internal kit of the showcases and replace them by steel in order to use magnet system. This was possible because we were very early in the process and in the project. We started to work on the project 2-3 years before the opening, and the showcase weren't manufactured yet. And when we made the proposal and we made some prototype for different system using magnet, and that was validated by both the scientific team of the museum, the curator, conservator, and the exhibition designer, architect, and the showcase manufacturer, which was Unifor at that time. The need for easy shift and rotation for textile was very important for the museum, and the system that we came up with was very interesting to fulfill these requirements. So since 2006, we've been using neodyme magnet. They're probably the strongest available on the market, and they come with different shapes and sizes, and that's practical. In the presentation today, we're going to look mostly as the use of magnet as a fixation technique for 3D object in museums. We won't go into textile presentation or 2D object today. There are several conditions that need to be considered before going into magnet fixation. The first one is the possibility of the adaptation of showcases, and that's an obvious condition. We need to have steel as a construction for the showcases, steel in the base, steel in the back panel. And these steel sheet need to have a sufficient thickness. We recommend usually a minimum of 1.5 or 2 millimeters thickness for the steel to be able to hold and the magnet with sufficient strength. There's another condition is the flexibility of the exhibition design. One aspect is and that will come later on again. One aspect is the distance between the object and the wall or the back of the showcases. If the distance is too important, so if the showcase is too deep, the use of magnet will be problematic. And of course, or maybe primary, there's also the typology and characteristic of the object to be presented in terms of weight, sizes, and not every object can be attached with magnet. Especially if you consider very heavy stone object, and the size of the magnet will be so big, and it won't be too visible, not very aesthetic. The neodyme magnet come in a wide typology of shape and sizes. You have the simple disc one that are at the bottom, come in different diameter and thickness. You have disc with countersunk hole or disc with threaded shaft or threaded hole. You have the rubberized magnet, and of course you can have also custom made. And we did for the Musée du Quai Branly in 2006 some B pyramid cube magnet that came in 4, 8, and 11 millimeters, and the shape allow a very easy manipulation of the magnet because the neodyme magnet are so strong. So if you want to remove them with your finger, it's almost impossible from the support. So here you'll see a video of part of the workshop, of the mounting workshop, and just to give you an idea of the cabinet with the storage of the magnet that we have. So it's pretty rough, but storage is very important for magnet. They get dusty, they attract the metallic dust. They can be damaged by shock. They can break, and you have to store also all the insert that you are making, and they came with different sizes, thickness. So there's if you start to go into a magnet system, it's another world, and you need to store every part of it. We usually, when we start some project, we start with new shapes for insert, for example, and we manufacture more than the necessary, and we have to keep them for further uses. Now come the the point of how to measure, how to choose what to use in terms of magnets. Of course, you've got the supplier data and the data sheet. And here, by example, it's the data sheet for a rubberized magnet, 31 millimeters diameter, 6 millimeter thickness. And the data sheet come up with a pull-out force of 8 kilos. But that depends on the thickness of the metal, on the steel that you apply the magnet on, and so the real importance here of how to choose, how to measure, is to do real size test of your magnet. These tests need to be done at the first stage, like for the prototypes, but also you need to test every object, every mount that you're going to use to validate if the object is not too heavy for that magnet, if the magnet is the proper size or positions. The distance between the object and the wall and the magnet is a key factor. It's a square. It's the square of the distance that that affect the resistance of the magnet, and the distance is considering the cantilevered action and force. The surface treatment, both of your magnet and of your back panel or your base, is also to be considered. If the surface treatment is too thick, and you diminish the strength of your magnet intensively. But there's technique to how to use or to reinforce the strength of your magnet. The insert is one technique that we use. So we manufacture here, in that case, is stainless steel inserts, and you place the magnet, the disc magnet inside. We usually glue, and we for a long time we use epoxy glue, but the neodyme magnet is covered. It's a powder compressed, and it's covered by a nickel plated layer, and that nickel is not easily it's not very easy to glue, and the epoxy has a tendency to detach, not to glue on the nickel. So now we more often we use structural silicone glue that are a bit more flexible and much more adhesive to the magnet. Here I was talking about test and different technique to reinforce the strength of the magnet. You will have two video. One is the a one magnet test, and and you will see that you apply a weight on it, whatever weight. Here it's 400 gram, 440 gram, and you just realize how the way the distance affect the resistance of the magnet. So it came up at 18 centimeters roughly. So at 12, it's the strength is good. In the second video, it's a mount with the two magnet, and they're the same size magnet than for the first one. And here you can apply 2 kilos to 2,000 gram, and it's all on the wall. So. One plus one magnet is can be 5 times stronger than just one. So that's one of the techniques that you can use to multiply the number of magnet and to connect them together. So you make a non-deformable system. Of course, we encountered a problem as using magnet. The first one is the fragility of the neodyme magnet. They break easily if you don't handle them properly. The second problem is the attraction of dust and metallic dust that are present in the air. A lot in the workshop, of course, but also in the urban environment, and that is well described in Gwen Spicer book. There's the sliding effect of some of the surface treatment of the showcase, like. Some paints are to be considered also, and if the strength of the magnet is not strong enough, the magnet can slide a little bit on the vertical surface. We're going to see now 2 case studies. One is the first one is the Anima Mundi Museum in the Vaticano in Rome, and the second one is the recently opened Musée de la Bibliothèque Nationale de France. And on these both example, we've been using extensively magnet as a fixation of 3D mounts. In order to avoid drilling and other type of fixation. So the Anima Mundi Museum in the Vaticano, it's still going on. There's still to be some part to be open. It's an ethnography museum. The exhibition designer is Adrien Gardet, and we've been so far working on 1,300 objects. Roughly, but need to be counted probably more precisely, but roughly 80% of the mounts are fixed by using magnet in that presentation. Here you can see 2 huge showcases with all the objects placed on pole, which are fixed by magnet on the steel floor. So that's the on-site, the first on-site visit, and it was early enough for us to propose to equip all the flooring with steel in order to use magnet as the fixation of the object. That was very interesting for the museum. So because they wanted to make some change every so often to change the composition and the layout of their showcases. So the first step was to we came back to the workshop and we tried to make some. I mean, we made some prototype on roughly 10 objects. We manufactured that in the workshop, and we send the prototype and the picture for validation to the museum and to the exhibition designer. So once it was agreed to work in that direction, and the showcase manufacturer Gopion agreed on changing the flooring to steel painted. We started to work directly on site, and that's the workshop at the Vaticano with some object. We were working very closely with the conservation team on every object in order to know their fragility, sensibility, and so on. That's the beginning of the work in the Vaticano. Was one of the first object was the mount manufacturer on site. So that's the test to the stability of the object on a steel base on site. You can see in the back of the object the adjustable bracket, so that they are easy to place and install. This is a Aboriginal pillar, and we manufacture kind of disc, which is a low at the bottom, so we can place a magnet into it. And this kind of pillar, the wood is very heavy, so it was important to have a large surface for the magnet to be placed inside. These tests are done systematically, so every time a mount is finished, the object is tested on the mount, and to check if the magnet is strong enough. These tests come before the surface treatment, the termination of the mount. Here, there's the protection is placed already with a shrinkable tube in order to avoid contact with the object, but then it's removed, and some fine grinding and painting are applied, and then the protection is placed again. Same here on that total shell dish. That's the test in the workshop. So systematically, objects are tested with their magnet in order to make sure that the mount is properly is stable and the magnet is strong enough to hold the object. It's not losing time to do all the tests, because when it's properly done, it goes then very quickly for the installation. The flexibility of the position of the object by using magnet and not to have to drill in the floor allow both the exhibition designer and the curator and the director of the museum to decide on site if of the last minute changes without any consequences on the showcase itself. Here is the installation. So the pole with the magnet is placed primary, and then the object is placed on the mount. On the right, you can see the exhibition designer Adrien Gardère checking the position of some object before the installation. Installation goes also for a small object. The podium here is made of steel, which allow us to use the magnet for the small object to placed on it. It goes very quickly for the installation. the height of the object is still adjustable, and the mount comes inside the insert and is fixed with a needle screw. So that's a showcase after installation. The label are still outside the showcase, but the objects are placed. And in few hours, if needed, you can change completely the layout and the position of object. This is also another view of the installed object inside the showcases. And this one also that we saw at the beginning, and the opening by the Pope on site. The second example that we are going to talk about today is the Musée de la Bibliothèque Nationale de France that has been open since September. It's the ex-Cabinet des Médailles, and the collection is just astonished. It's an Italian exhibition designer studio, and we've been dealing with 900 objects. And roughly, not very sure about the number, but it's roughly 50% of the objects are fixed using magnets. So here you can see a kind of mixed object showcases, and you have objects that are just standing, and here in red the objects that are fixed with magnet insert holding the mount. Same thing in that showcase, and here you've got some objects on the top that are placed on glass shelf, and the mounts are connected to a freestanding base, but the objects at the bottom are placed directly on the steel base, and the fixation is magnet. It was a long walk for the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and the first step was to here also to make a study of the different typology of mounts, and to make the proposal of some change in the showcases in order to use magnet for easy shifting of object and change of showcases. So it was it's quite a long study, but here's some pages about the presentation that we've done for the use of the magnet with the different size and shapes. The way we did some prototype to show that they are strong enough to hold some dishes and heavy object, or for some very small object like coins and medals, the way we propose to have them placed on table showcases. The installation here is the Trésor de Berthouville, which is a Roman collection of amazing silver dishes and objects. So we, according to the mock-up, the good thing is that without drilling, you can place and make some last-minute change to make sure that everything is in the proper position on site. And that's the view of the showcase after the installation. So here all the shelves are made of steel, and they are epoxy paint. One funny things, funny because for the today presentation of the conference, which is at the Getty. The treasure of the Bertheville was presented at the Getty a few years ago, and most of these objects were mounted by the Getty Mountmaker team. And we decided with the curator of the Bibliothèque Nationale to reuse most of these mounts, and we adapt them to place the magnet with the road that you can see on the picture. Some other showcases presented some mixed object, and we proposed to use some panel for the jewelry, which came with a lot of small pieces, and they are needle or nail to these panel on the top. And these panels are fixed with a magnet on the back of the showcase. For the other objects that are a bit bigger, the magnet is used also to fix the object directly on the back panel, and that's avoiding holes and allowing the reposition of object in the future. On some of the showcase here, you can see from the side. You don't see from the front because the magnet is hidden by the object. But from the side, you can see the type of magnet and insert that we've been using in that showcases. In another gallery, they manufacture designs cabinet made of steel. We make them change to be in steel to allow us to use magnet for the fixation of the mount for all these ceramics, Greek ceramics. Here's a good example. It's a quite heavy object. It's a bronze head, Roman bronze head. The weight is pretty much in the front of the head, and at the beginning, the way the pedestal made of steel was manufactured was using a sheet of metal which were too thin, and the strength of the magnet was not strong enough. So we asked the showcase manufacturer, Gopion, to replace the pedestal with a thicker steel, and that holds perfectly the head. Here in another showcase, you can see also the magnet at the bottom of the dish. In that showcase, this is an historical showcase of the Bibliothèque Nationale, and they have been reshaped. The top shelf is made of glass, and the mounts are with freestanding base, and the middle shelf and the bottom shelf are made of steel, and that allow us to use magnets again. That's the gallery for the coins and medals. There are table showcases, and the coins and medals are presented on a slope of steel. And we've been designing and using some small mounts that are fixed with a small magnet in the center. Here you can see the mounts without the medal on the top right, and just for you to understand the way we work on these project. We prepared our database, and everything is registered in it. You get access to on your iPad on site to the exhibition design drawings, and you record on your file the name of the mount maker, the type of material that you use, and you can follow the process of your mounting, especially if it goes to painting or other things. Still in the same gallery, here's some metal, and you can place them without drilling, which is very practical. And here from the side, when the showcase is open, you can see the side, and you can see the magnet at the bottom of each medal. Still at the Bibliothèque Nationale, another showcase with mixed different typology of object, and here it's I placed this that photo for the manuscript and the book mount, and there's specificity in the Bibliothèque Nationale is that they've got their own workshop for making a book mount, and they use mostly plexiglass for years. And we came up with a system to for the feet for these plexiglass mounts that can be reusable and adaptable. So we provided the first plexiglass book mounts, but they will continue to manufacture according to the shift of object inside the showcases, because they change the presentation of the manuscript every 2 months, every 3 months, and we delivered enough feet which are placed with and fixed with magnet. As you can see here, so they can adapt and reuse the feet for their other presentation. Here also you can see the book stand and the feet which are with magnets sticking on the floor of the showcase. In that showcase with 2 frame, here also we tried to avoid having a hole in the showcase, in the back of the showcase. So we've been using, and I'll show you on a small video here, some bracket that we design, and each of the bracket they are reusable on different frame, because the frame are the same thickness. Each of them have two magnet who came up, and the top bracket are on a sliding system, so you can remove the frame before removing the mount. Finally, the same, I said I was not talking about 2D object, but just for the Bibliothèque Nationale, we also adapt some hanging system with magnet for the larger frame and original drawings that they have. And that was very practical, because for the same thing, they're going to change them very often, and without hole, it's easy for them to place and change the object. So that's the end of the presentation. I just wanted to insist again of the different interest of using magnet in permanent museum. One is the easy installation of the object on site, and that's to be considered, because very often the schedule for installation are shorter and shorter. There's also a very big interest in shifting object, rotation of object for fragile collection, and that's a consideration that is more and more important for museum. And using magnet allow you to change every so often and very quickly your object inside showcases. The last and probably one of the most interesting part for museum teams is that they keep the flexibility of their showcase for a long time, and very often the exhibition designer they think the museum as something will stay there for a few years, but a museum museum staff, they know that it's going to last for 20, 50 years before having new showcases. So to be able to change your collection inside showcases easily without dismantling these huge showcases, or without changing the back panel because they're hole in it, it's a very big advantage. And so I will push in the direction of using magnet system for these reasons. So I thank you very much for your time, and see you soon. Bye bye.
Thank you, Stefan. I think he is joining us virtually today. Wonderful. Thank you, Stefan. And thank you for featuring the Bertheville silver mounts. Yes, we're very familiar with those mounts. It's nice to see that they have a future as well. Yeah, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
On smaller mounts like the coin mounts, are your mount posts threaded directly into the magnets?
Yeah, we develop a laser cut pre-mount system with different sizes according to the sizes of the metal and coins. And the magnet is fixed by using a shrinkable tube, PET. So it's just the tube shrink on the mount that allowed the fixation of the magnet on the small mount. So there's no glue and no screw and nothing, just a shrinkable tube.
Hello, thank you so much. That was fascinating. Do you have any experience with electromagnets?
Yeah, I mean, we thought about that for a while, specifically on the bigger object. The problem is to make sure that there's no that the electrical system won't shut down. Otherwise, everything fall. But yeah, we thought about that at the beginning, but we never came into in that direction.
How do you position objects with the magnets and not scratch the surface when you're moving it around?
Different possibility. We use interface. That could be mylar or even a textile or a Sweden textile, for example. And then at the last moment, we place, and then you bend the mount and remove the magnet and release the interface. In some situation, you can cover the magnet with a soft textile, but you need to make sure that it's thin enough not to affect too much the strength of the magnet. But it's a good question, because manipulation can, especially if the paint of the showcase is fragile or can be easily marked, the manipulation of the magnet on it, it's an issue. Yeah.
For the larger objects, we saw, which are mostly deck mounted, probably you'll have to use very strong magnet with this, and I just wanted to know what kind of magnet did you use? I know it's neodymium, but which pull force it has, and also did you take any precaution during install while handling these kind of magnets?
I mean, one of the precautions is not to put your finger in between two magnets because it's sometimes very painful. Yeah, I mean, we're still using kind of regular sizes. I mean, we're not in very big sizes. So like 60 millimeters, 80 millimeters diameter for some of the big objects that you saw. Obviously, in the vertical position, it makes more, it's easily, and you don't need the same strength than having the magnet on the wall, for example. But if you do it on the wall by using a double, by using several magnets in your mount, you add turbo strength to your system, and especially, I mean, when they are vertical, one on top of the other. If they're horizontal, the strength is not good, but vertically it works very well. So far we've been using for some of the big objects at the Vaticano some pull strengths of 150, 180 kilos, kind of magnet size.
For the casework that you use, I see that you use a lot of steel. Do you usually spec that out, or was it already spec'd out by the designer? And two, how about the cost difference in making those casework? Steel is definitely much more expensive.
More expensive, more expensive than what? I mean, it's not much more expensive than aluminium when you use it as a back panel. So yes, it's more expensive than MDF or wood, but there's a tendency of avoiding all these materials now in showcases. So we very often can come up with design with aluminium panel or 4X panel or this kind of thing. So the difference in the cost is not that important. And I would say maybe you can have a factor of 10-20% increase regarding your showcase. But if you consider the time that you're not going to spend in drilling for the installation, it's worthwhile using steel as back panel. The first part of the question, I don't remember what was it, but if you want to ask me again. Sorry?
Do we have any other questions?
We have
several. Go ahead and go with the virtual first.
Okay, we have a couple of virtual questions. Have you experienced or thought about any risk of the magnets shifting or rotating in an earthquake or any other kind of building rotation or building vibration like that?
I mean, if you are at the kind of the limit of the stability of your magnet, of the strength of your magnet, of course, the vibration may affect the system, and you can have the magnet to fall down. But you shouldn't be at that limit. You have to take precaution and be strong enough. So if you're strong enough, I won't be affected by earthquake in any case. It's just a matter of how strong your magnet is compared to the movement. So you have to test, and you have to test before the installation.
Excellent, thank you. There's another question about, so once you've committed to steel cases And you mentioned that sometimes there may be painting surfaces or something that are more slippery or like that, and you find yourself at the case, and over time, maybe the shear strength things slide or rotate. Do you have strategies for adapting then, or for mechanically attaching if the magnet does start to fail, if that system doesn't work in that situation?
Yeah, but that's a general, consideration that you have to think, and it's not. If you think that in one case the magnet is not the good system to hold the mount, you just have to use another system. Could be mechanical. Whatever you have in store. But so I think it's just one system. It's not something that can be used blindly, and you have to be aware of their limit and the different possibilities that you can find to do the job.
We have two questions in the house. Let's start in the back.
Would you say it was costly to start working with these magnets, especially the larger ones? Because I'm not sure about prices, especially the stronger ones.
I didn't get the question. Is it a question about the price of the magnet?
Yeah. Would you say it was costly to make this step towards working with magnets?
Yeah, I mean that you need to invest a little bit in the different systems. So because you need to have them in advance in quantities, and so it's costly because it's like adding new tools or switching from brass welding to TIG welding. So it's new tools, so you have to invest into it. So what I meant was to don't be amateur by using magnet. I mean, you have to embrace the thing and make sure that you have a thing in stock in quantities, being able to change from one size to the other, and make sure that you can do the insert yourself and all these kind of consideration.
All right, and one last question from the front.
Are there objects that you would not use magnets around, like early metals or burial objects, or things that you're concerned about magnetizing?
Good question. I think we should look into the way a magnet can affect the object itself. So we're talking about mostly magnetized materials, and it's to change the magnetized to change a metal or iron metal with the magnet next to it. It's something that shouldn't happen very easily. But it's it's a good question. I'm thinking about meteorite, for example, but the fact is, regarding magnet, I mean, if you the distance that you have between your magnet and your object, even if as I mentioned in the presentation, that you try to reduce the distance in order to strengthen the magnet, but even the small distance, few centimeters, and you don't have the magnet field affecting anything. There's also the question of the people with pacemaker that can be affected by magnet. But the same thing. I mean, they of course they shouldn't get the magnet in their pocket or in their shirt. But if they are at 20 centimeters from a magnet, I mean, if the machine that they have is a few centimeters from the magnet, it's fine. So for the moment, the material itself,
I wouldn't say it's an issue with the way we work on it.
Thank you so much, Stefan, and thank you for joining us so late.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you all.
Our next talk is from Eric Risser, and he is a conservator here in Antiquities Conservation at the Getty Museum, and his talk is Considerations of Alternative Mount Designs for Three-Dimensional Objects. Thanks. It is here, and then I believe, Gus, the laser pointer for this one? Is it the red button?
Yes,
it's bright. It's actually bright up here.
That's advancing forward and back. Yeah, you got it. All right. I had hoped to be able to move around. I'm not somebody who usually likes to stay in one place, and particularly with the nerves I've got, typically I'll get those out by pacing a stage. So I have to be fixed here, obviously for the people online. So please bear with me. Hopefully my nerves will ebb as I get into this. But I really want to start by thanking the organizers of the International Mountmakers Forum for what has been an incredibly interesting and thought-provoking day and a half to this point. I hope to be able to contribute to that with this talk. It is going to be a little bit of a tightrope walk for me in the sense that I'm going to be talking without notes. So I'm going to be using images basically as a visual prompt to cover the salient points. But significantly, what I'm going to be talking about is actually not work of my own to the great degree. It's the work of a mount maker at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art named David Armendariz. And I'm going to be talking about his work because I'm very familiar with it. Dave worked previously here at the Getty in my department and was made a significant contribution along with B.J. Farrar and Mackenzie Lowry in the development and codification to our approach of mount making to our permanent collection, which very much still to this day informs the approaches that we take on to our changing exhibitions and to our short loan objects. So with all of that said, the reason I'm presenting this is one, because Dave would not present it himself, but two, is that I'm familiar with the methods and materials that Dave has employed in what he's presently doing at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. But why it's interesting to me is that based on the background that we have that's shared, and that allows me to understand his mentality as, again, the techniques and the materials, it's the adaptations and the changes that he's made to those techniques in order to adapt it to the new logistical situation in which he finds himself. And that is really what I find to be very interesting, this idea of being able to take something that we know is efficacious, but then finding a way to make it efficient and fit into his newer environment. So with that said, this first slide is basically an image of one of the galleries of ancient Greek ceramics at the Louvre. And this is really meant to undermine the fact that we're talking about an object type. I'm going to be talking about a specific object type. In this sense, we're talking about ceramics. Everything I'm going to show is ancient world. That's my sweet spot. That's my interest, so please forgive me. But please understand, we're talking about an object type. So with ceramics, whether that's coil-made, whether that's wheel-thrown, what this really is meant to illustrate is the great variety in size, in shape, in weight that is possible with that, and a system that you can adapt to work with all these various sizes and shapes. So think to yesterday's talk of the British Museum, where they're talking about the stone axes, the 70 plus that they had to put on display. Again, those are of a object type, but each one of them is different in size, shape, and very individual. Yeah, please do. Sure. Hear me better now? Okay, sorry. Now I have to hear myself. That's the bad part. Okay. So in essence, we're talking about an object type. And again, a general approach that is adaptable enough to allow you to deal with the individuality of each object, but still be efficient in terms of the amount of time that it takes to do that, but significantly in the materials, the cost thereof, and in the equipment that's necessary to do that. So what he's done I find to be very applicable to a great number of scenarios. I'm sure that a lot of you find yourselves in, whether that's in private practice or in, when you're dealing with extreme time constraints or, real budgetary constraints. But anyways, the idea is we're talking about an object type here. okay? Reinforcing it, I'm going to be beating you over the head with the same thing, so I apologize up front, but here is just another image, again, really underlining the fact that this object type here, talking about ceramics in a singular gallery, oops, you have one of the largest vases from antiquity, down to a medium to small to very, very small. And again, is there an approach that allows you to deal with the great majority of these scenarios that is safe and effective and truly adaptable? Okay, again, driving on the same point, different shapes, different sizes, but more importantly, within these, there is these inherent eccentric hollows or voids, right? Basically the cavities of the undersides of the feet, and of course, the cavities of the body themselves, and how those can be used in a practical sense in the mount making. How Dave has utilized that based on the techniques that I know from using here, but also how the adaptability that he's done has allowed me entree into adapting some of my own personal interests, which, following on from Stefan, is really about the use of magnets. And so that's what I'll get to at the end. I'm spitballing in front of all of you. So really what I'm hoping is, a lot what I'm going to talk about here, I'm sure it's not new to anyone. But many of you may have already experienced with this, and I would love to hear that. But I'm also throwing a lot of this out here as to ideas, and to a great degree, some of the experience and the experimentation that's happened to date, so that hopefully people will take this and walk away from it and make it their own. And then hopefully in 2, 4, 6, 8 years, see you back at another IMF presenting what you found. All right? So in any event, this is the what we'll call the approach that I'm familiar with, which these are 2 amphorae from on display here at the villa. So this is part of the ancient Mediterranean collection, of which I'm part of the conservation department. And the 2 basic approaches that we've adapted, I'm sure these are well known to everyone, but I'll just simply go through them very quickly. On the right here, you're seeing a clip system. So this is basically an external form of immobilization of this object. Now, this isn't so much about we're worried about the public interacting with these pieces. These are what we're calling seismic mounts. The whole point of this, these are inside vitrines. So again, we're not worried about necessarily somebody interacting, tugging, or lifting. We're worried about the eventuality of an earthquake here in Los Angeles. So the idea of this external immobilization is really immobilizing in the lateral and in the vertical. So basically in your various forms of movement. The clips here are an external form of immobilization in association with an internal interface. So that interface effectively is cast into the cavity. It is not joined in, but is attached down to the deck. And then together with these, effectively what that does is that prevents lateral movement in it. And because this comes up and over the top here, it also prevents vertical movement, okay? This vase here, being of a very similar type, is a lot more top-heavy. You have a much heavier rim and a much heavier handle. So effectively, this is a much more top-heavy object, where if force were to come in the form of an earthquake, these may not be sufficient to restrain this, or you may have such an accumulation of force in those 3 points that it could result in damage. So in those instances, we've developed a contour here to follow the profile up in the vertical. Now, of course, this is interchangeable between clips and this. The idea is you can use 2 clips with a contour, whatever it is that the object specifically needs. But the idea here is that what this allows you to do is to give a stabilizing or bridging external element. It will bridge between a foot and a body, which are made separately and then joined, so a potential point of weakness, but significantly allows you to tie off here under the rim, at the shoulder, or potentially down here. In any or all of those is a way of effectively lowering the center of gravity. So again, as force comes in lateral, a lower center of gravity, less tipping, less force being placed in down here, and the object basically being held still, okay? This here is a detail of those. What you're seeing here, this is quite sleek, but really what you have to understand here is that you have a threaded rod. So you have a hole in your deck and you have a threaded rod that then is either drilled and tapped into the underside of this and soldered, and therefore means that it is affixed to the underside of the deck or the display surface. Whether that means that may mean you need access to the interior of your case or access to the underside of a buildup. Here instead you have a tail or a tab, which effectively allows you to secure to the top of the display surface or deck, okay? So these are just details of those two basic systems. This could be for a clip if you were to limit it here, or all the way up for a contour. And of course, this works in association with the fact that you are tying off up above, typically with a monofilament. Okay, so I talked up Dave. Let me talk you through a little bit of what I've just gone through and how he's adapted that, and how I find that to be very interesting, given that he's then able to tackle many issues of object type. So whether that ceramic is ancient, whether it's a Art Deco from the earlier part of the 20th century, whether it's Mesoamerican, whether it's a Ming Dynasty vase, the concept is the same, and he can tackle that with a very simple, straightforward, and again, very efficient system. This is basically what I've seen as a change, and what I find very interesting is that he starts with basically sheet metal, right? He starts with steel, and effectively what he does is he takes the footprint of the object. Okay, again, very simple, particularly something that's wheel thrown. You don't really have to interact with the object. So as a conservator, one of the things I love about the system when I talk about the efficiency and the adaptability, the efficiency to me means less physical interaction with the object, both in terms of what it takes to gather the information and to fabricate, but significantly in the installation and in the deinstallation of the object. Okay, so he's taking the sheet steel, basically cut the footprint, and then he's cut these slots in. Now, based on the gauge or the thickness of the steel, that's directly proportional basically to the size of the object that you're going to be working on. What the adaptability here is how many clips you really need. Do you want 3? You could have 4, 5, 6, 7. So again, something very easy to decide what you need to the object and then implement. And of course, knowing the thickness, you can use simple flat stock that is of the same gauge, or even a higher gauge if you want something that's slightly thinner. Now you look at this and you say, okay, what's the big deal? Well, when we're talking about an installation or a deinstallation, the big deal to me is right here. Before, whether it's 3 clips or 2 clips and a contour and an interface, you're talking about 4 holes on the top of a deck. 1 internal, 3 external. Here you're talking about a single point of connection, okay? That single point of connection, 1, means you have less coordination between points, so less probability of mistakes. But also, if you mistake drilling out here and you have to move, or let's say a curator changes their mind as to where they want something, you have a big problem in terms of patching your deck if you're drilling through. Something like this, if you're still within the footprint of the object, much easier to adjust and simply move the object. But the part that I really find very interesting about this is that he's taken the interfaces that we always used before, and now he places the interface over that steel plate. So effectively what he's doing is what was an element before to preventing lateral movement, he effectively is turning this into a washer and a nut. Okay, so these pieces no longer have to be affixed mechanically. The clips themselves, they slot in and they slot out. Okay, so by fixing through here, fixing this and this through one piece into the deck, you could fix them using a screw, a bolt, you could use wax, you could use resins, as we saw with the Harvard Museum talk yesterday. All of those are on the table. Again, that's an adaptation you can build into the system, quite simply depend on what you needed. But the reality is that this then just allows you to simply place the object and slide the clips in place. Now you have vertical restraint as well as horizontal restraint, but you've done it in a way in which is very easy to fabricate and to implement. So this is then again just laid out side by side. And when I'm talking about that idea of adaptability, here is some other objects, again, of a very small scale. Here, a Janiform Cantharos, but where you can see 4 clips have been used. And again, you have the steel plate, you have a small concave, this is mold made, small concave space underneath, where that interface does the same thing. Or here, an Ascos on the left, or a gilded Cantharos on the right. So these are all small. The intrinsic weight of the pieces allows you to get away with simply using clips, right? But as I said before, maybe that adaptability is one of those clips becomes a profile. At what point does that profile stop in the vertical? That's what I want to get to at the end of this talk, where the magnets come in. But right now we're going to look at scalability. So again, that adaptability in terms of the scale. Here, again, beating you over the head always with the same type of thing, just looking at a plate with the slots and clips. But you can tell from the interface that this is a much larger object. It's a deeper, wider interface. So this would be, tantamount to some of those we saw earlier in the talk. He did not furnish me with an image of what this looked like afterwards. But here, what I wanted to highlight was the fact that here you have a mechanical immobilization or restraint on the exterior. And what has been opted for here is to then also look at adhesive restraint and a combination thereof. And why that's interesting to me is, obviously here what you're doing is you're sharing that spread of force in the eventuality of that coming in between these three external points, and then you are sharing that with an adhesive restraint. Again, here it's simply using, I think, what is a museum wax. But the idea is how you can adapt this to adapt this. And that's really where I want to get to with the discussion of magnets. Okay? So in a similar type vase as to this, you can see traditionally this is how we've handled them. We felt that in essence you are top heavy enough and you're tall enough that we need to have an external restraint that travels fairly high up the vertical of the object. These mounts are incredibly effective. They're very effective at what they do, and in these instances, they're also effective in allowing for the proper display of these objects. You can see here, they do bisect a decorative surface, but here these decorative surfaces are fairly monochromatic. This is slightly problematic, even if you faux it in, but again, for the most part, it's off to the side. Based on the casework, oftentimes you can put that in the back or put it in a discrete place, so it's not a problem. I can't necessarily say the same thing about this. This is not to criticize heavily this mount. This mount, again, is very effective at protecting this object. What it is not very effective at is not obscuring the decorative surface, which is one of the great significance of this piece, which is why it's in the round. Now, I'm not meaning to be disingenuous. Part of the reason why this is here is because this is actually a point of weakness in here. There actually is a blind crack, which is why it was felt that there needed to be this bridging element that went high up to basically unify these two through, again, taking any force and traversing it and bringing it down into the deck. My question is, using that basic technique that I've seen Dave develop, is there ways in which, again, you can adapt that so that you can necessarily maybe reduce the amount of vertical disturbance that's needed, to maybe just limit it to a number of clips, or maybe a bit pie in the sky? Could you ever make it to the point where utilizing this cavity and now maybe considering this one, could you actually get rid of all external restraint? So this is the spitball part. And this is just a little bit of a practical as to having seen this done. Here you're seeing the cavity of the underside of a foot, and here you're seeing a cavity of the interior of the body. And effectively what you're seeing, of course, as mentioned in the previous talk, magnets, they're amazing things. They are magical. It's literally in their title. But they do have limitations. And I think you could see that with some of the objects that were previously, you can go up to a certain point and then you have to stop, particularly when you're talking with a cantilever. Here, though, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about things that are displayed in the vertical to a deck. Here we have a lot of volume. So the reality is you can do a lot of magnet stacking on the type here so that you can determine and you can dial in the pull strength that you need. But the idea is, in order for you to understand what you need in terms of the size of the magnet as well as the placements of them, of course, what is possible in terms of the cavity you have on the most limiting one, which is this one here, but also what are the forces that you're trying to do. You have to define what you're trying to do, and you have to define basically what is the weight of this object. So to say this is that sweet spot of the amount of pull force that is necessary to either, maybe I can't actually achieve what is the total weight or beyond the weight of the object, but maybe I can achieve enough of a pull force that I don't have to put a contour high up. Maybe I can limit it only to the point that it goes to between body and foot and put a foot ring. Again, minimizing the visual disturbance but still creating an effective mount. What I would love to see is sort of that end point, and what I will continue to try to experiment with, and what I hope other people will take and work with, just whether it's ceramic or not, the idea where you have the ability to employ internally magnets. How far we can take this. So here the idea is you have 4, And the point being is that with a singular, you're not going to get sufficient pull strength. Now, one of the things that I was also mentioned by Stefan, of course, is the distance between magnets. The fact that here you have something in between, they are backed off of each other. There is a space in between. So you have to understand how much that affects the ideal pull force, and then significantly the density of the material that is in between. Both of those will directly impact how much pull force is actually endowed. But there clearly is a pull force in that the magnets here, this is basically an ethafoam that has been scalloped out so that it basically can take the concave form of the interior of the body, and then the magnets here placed below. So they're being held in place simply through the magnetism here. So you know there is a pull force, but how much? So here, if you say, I need to get to 40 pounds, and this one only gives me 5. Well, it's a help. Maybe I can reduce a little bit, but if I can start actually creating more or start stacking in here, can I get up to that 40? But also what you're seeing here is the fact that this one is different because these have the poles all in the positive, say, and this one in the negative. And then, of course, you have the opposite situation on the interior where you have the negatives and one positive. The reason for that, of course, is trying to, how do you implement putting in this interface? Because, of course, that pull force means that it can get out of control and you could slap it down inside. But by basically reversing a polarity, if with a slight turn you can bring things in where there still is a repulsion, you can simply rotate and then in a more controlled soft landing effectively put this where it needs to be. And likewise, through a rotational motion, you can basically find the tear strength you need to basically back the magnets off and pull it out. Okay? So this is then that translated into an interface, again, with the plate below and clips, and then the interior one translated into resin as well. Again, the ethafoam still below, so you do have a soft padding between the ceramic surface and the magnets. Tyvek can be put there, Velara, any number of things. But what this has allowed in terms of that total pull strength is for an object this size and this weight basically displayed with only 3 clips. And at that point, not the need of a contour that travels up to the handle of the neck. All right, that's what I got.
You don't get to hide. Do we have any questions? We are way over time, so I'm going to limit it to 2 questions. Sorry. You can email Eric, though. You know where to find him.
Unfortunately, yeah.
You can email Eric. Is that okay with you? I'm sorry.
Fine. No, it's fine.
I'm sorry.
Again, I welcome comments. I would really love to hear people's experiences thinking about these things. Again, none of this, I'm sure, is revolutionary or even all that new, but I think it's worth just bringing to this forum because this is about sharing. And I really would love to hear people's experiences, and if not, if this is something that's new to somebody, and hopefully that can plant a small seed that then people can go out and make this their own, adapt it to their own needs, and then come back and present it at the next one of these.
How are the clips secured at the bottom?
The clips are basically slid into place. So the idea, of course, is the interface being placed there and secured through that. The clips actually can't come up, right? They can only slide in line with the slot. So you have to very intentionally apply force on the line of the deck in line with that slot. And of course, if you're talking about 3, each one of those is in a 120. So the probability of that happening in a seismic event, that following exactly in line to get that to back out, is pretty minimal. It is still possible. So with that said, there's a very easy workaround. Put a tiny dab of wax at the interface between the deck and that, and at that point, the only way to fail that is very intentional force to pull it back. But again, if that's slotted correctly, it has to be very much in line with that slot. Any force that is slightly to the side basically causes it to bind. That's what I love about that system. You don't have to have 4 points of securing. Sorry, I got a little excited. Literally, all you have to do is slide them in until they're, obviously they're padded out, they're conformal, and they contact. And then to reverse, simply to slide them out. Now, it's not as simple as, boop, again, there is a level of friction in there in that slot. Now, to be even a little sexier about it, if you really wanted to, but again, the idea was to make this really simple. If you were to take those slots and you had them T-slotted, Again, that's an even greater reinforcement. Or maybe you don't have as much of a interface that you can do there. Well, then you can basically translate that same thing where you T-slot it. But the concept is still there. And for that concept is really what I thank Dave. That's something he really just opened my mind to, something which the adaptability of that I thought was brilliant. And then it was like, well, how can you just keep working with this to then effectively try to make something that's easy to employ as well as to take away? So again, that efficiency, I think, is key in so many ways, but also that adaptability of it. By mixing and matching and then incorporating, you really can start playing and figuring out different things. Not all of it's going to work, and it's not going to work in all scenarios, but that's not the point. It may cover quite a few. One more question, since there's only two.
Hello. I'm curious. I had this question actually for the last presenter, but I think it applies to this one as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to do with I was really interested in the system they employed to test the mounts, especially against cantilever, falling over. And so I wonder if you could comment on, testing methodology that maybe accompanied this.
I mean, I think as you saw in Stefan's talk, really the only way of doing any type of testing is kind of real world. I don't necessarily encourage you to go out and use a real object for that. If you want to test, like on a ceramic and see at what point you're going to get that failure, how much stacking you have to do, you need to have developed, an idea of what's the ideal, but understand the density and the thickness in between. And that's very individual to the object. So oftentimes it really is simply a testing of trying this one, and how much pull strength it actually takes. So that's one of the things, some of the work that I'd like to do in the future with others here, is that we would like to try to, as much as we can, standardize, understand standards between these types of thicknesses in these types of materials, whether those are woods, whether those are resins, whether those are different types of metals, whether those are ceramics, what that effect that has on the pull strength. Unfortunately, that isn't necessarily fully out there yet. Again, magnets are very well established for two-dimensional and lightweight three-dimensional. When we're getting into bigger and heavier, we don't really have a codified testing, so that really has to be done. So a lot of it really right now has been trial and error. I hope that answers your question. There isn't no hard and fast rule. A lot of it is seeing what works and what doesn't work. This is the weight that I have of this object. This is the force I'm anticipating. So how can I basically mitigate that? How much pull strength do I need? Well, here, again, you can do a pull test, but that's one of those where we need to sit down and say, here's all these different thicknesses and all these different materials and all these different densities, and literally do pull tests and figure out this one, which in an optimum says it's 50 pounds of pull force, but when you have this distance and this much density, it's actually 5. So if I want to achieve that, I want to achieve 40, and I only have 5, I either have to then increase the number of magnets or start magnet stacking somewhere else. Does that help? All right.
Thank you, Eric. I apologize for having to cut you off. Our next speaker is Eric Michael Tollefson. He is a frame conservator from the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and his talk is The Reframing and Mounting of Ginevra da Benci for Exhibition. Thank you, Eric.
I also have to thank the organizers of the forum for having me today, because I'm not a mount maker. I'm a frame maker. And I never considered myself a mount maker until I was here last year, and BJ suggested that I come to the forum after I relayed the story I'm about to tell you. I also need to thank my colleagues at the gallery, without whose help I would not have been able to do this in such a short amount of time. A little context for that is I arrived at the gallery the end of July of 2019. I wasn't able to get my hands on the object until mid-August, and the press day was September 10th. So it's a little bit of a tight deadline. And so, to begin, the National Gallery of Art, in the summer of 2019, we were preparing to mount the first ever monographic exhibition in the United States of Andrea Verrocchio, the innovative Renaissance artist and teacher whose pupils included, among others, Perugino, Botticelli, and Leonardo da Vinci. The exhibition brought together some 50 of Verrocchio's masterpieces, allowing viewers to appreciate his work in painting, sculpture, and drawing, how they stimulate each creativity across each medium. To illustrate his vision and his influence on the students' training, some of his pupils' works were included in the exhibition, including National Gallery of Art's own crown jewel, the portrait of Ginevra da Vinci, one of only 3 female portraits completed and the only Leonardo da Vinci painting in the Americas. The current installation, was in a baffle that had been there for about 30 years, which was about 5 feet across and 7 feet tall. And you could view the backside by walking around, and there was a cavity in which you could see the verso of the painting. The current mount and frame design, they had been integrated into the baffle, so a new mount and frame design was needed for the exhibition. The unique characteristic of this that it is two-sided, but also that this painting was cut down in its past, and an additional material was added to the bottom edge of the cut painting. I'm going to edit a little bit since we're running on time. Once we took it off view, I had a very brief moment to review the previous installation to kind of help guide where I would go with this, because like I said, I just started. This is my first task that was handed to me when I started at the gallery. Measuring up was kind of a stressful situation. Handling this was, this painting is never taken off view, and so when it is taken off view, everyone wants to get their hands on it so they can be analyzed and photographed. So the panel's fairly flat for its age, but there was some slight warping and cupping and variations in thickness in the panel. And as you can see here, this is the material that was added, adding the kind of the problem in how you mounted this for viewing on both sides inside 2 frames. So what we did was we traced every edge of this panel in order to try to get a real sense of the shape of the object. I had about 2 hours to do this before I was going to go back on view. Shout out to the mount shop. Some views showing how it fit in its current frame, showing the extra piece sticking out the back and the way that this was adhered inside the previous frame, which was period. And due to the way these were constructed, there was no way to, well, it was possible to perhaps use the frame in the new installation, but there was a great risk of destroying the frame. And if that happened, then we would be back to square one with what to do. So the decision was to manufacture 2 frames that we could put on the new display. So we began research on what type of frame would be appropriate for this. We ended up settling on a Florentine cassetta frame design, but sans sgraffito because of the time constraint. And here's kind of an early mock-up of what we were considering to scale. And it was actually during the process of this talk that I remembered how I actually came up with the idea for what I did. Starting with a sketch of a frame, bringing that into Photoshop, and the evolution of the mount was kind of taking form as I progressed. Coming up with the idea of 2 trays that would encapsulate the painting, creating a more unified outside dimension. So I started by doing a wood mock-up of this, and then translated that into CAD drawings in order to get a more comprehensive, exacting view of what this would be. Some different views of the mock-up. And then going into how the frame would interact with the tray and the tray would interact with the mount. Originally, this was going to be the sections of the frame were going to be able to be attached to the base of the frame, which would be attached to the mount, which evolved as I went through the iterations of how these would go together. You can see here the black piece, that's the panel, and the recto and verso frames. Altering the frame design a bit. Now this is the top view looking down, which you'll see in a moment because I have a animation showing how this all comes together. And then the variation of the frame design was getting more simpler as the time was getting shorter as we were approaching the date. And this is the top-down view of the plinth, which is where the mount would penetrate through the plinth into the base of the pedestal, into the deck. And so this is an exploded view of all the components and how they would work together. And I have a little kind of view in how this works. I can show you that here. So you get a view of the detail of the mount. And it was clear when I made the prototype in wood that the only material that would be strong enough to withstand warping would be steel. And then we have a view of inside. This is the part that's accommodating that extra section of wood that's sticking out. And this addition was in-painted years ago, but that has always been something that's been hidden inside of the frame, whatever frame it's been in, which you can see there in the bottom of the painting. And then this is the view of all of the components. So the wooden mount that goes into the deck, the steel tray that goes into the wooden mount, and then the frames that cover and are attached with, of course, magnets. And then we have one more view of the completed piece. Just so that I could see that this did make sense. This was all in about 2 weeks' time designed. So once we were kind of confident this would work, we began manufacturing the steel case. I'm not a welder, but I fortunately had a studio mate who was a sculpture tech at Corcoran and a sculptor, and he agreed to do it in the short time frame of about 10 days. And he used TIG welded with 303 and 304 stainless. And we did a test fitting with the Ginevra early morning as to not take it off view needlessly again. But this needed to happen just to ensure that the measurements I took, that everything was going to fit. If any adjustments needed to be made, we could make them at this point. But it fit perfectly, which was surprising. We expected something to go wrong. And we painted the inside edge, the only part of the mount that you will see, we painted with golden MSA colors. Thank you, Robert. He recommended that to me. So now that this fit, and I knew it fit, then I could begin on the frames because there simply was no time that if I had made the frames and there was an alteration we had to make here, I couldn't also make that in the frames. I had able to do some prep work on the frames, which are carved and gilded, but nothing could be cut to size. So at this point was essentially the countdown of how much time does it take for glue to dry. And the various parts of that, how the frames went together. They were purposely made in pieces and assembled and gessoed separately, and then in the final stage assembled and gessoed so that they would have some natural cracks forming as these parts moved slightly as though but they were still very secured together. And here's our test fitting of the tray in the wood mount, or wood mount in the pedestal. And one alteration was once I slid it in, it added about 20 pounds, which is very stabilizing, but also no way to get it out. So we added this small, here I can see a little drawing, and we cut away a little finger hole to get your fingers in to push it out. So once I knew this fit, the frames are assembled, all we had to do is finish the frames. So the mount was now brought up to the exhibition where Ginevra was put inside Sand's frame. So now she's just waiting for the frame, and we all thought she looked a little happier in her new mount here, which I think she is. So here we are, the day, I think this is the day before press day. Exactly. And, you know, I really have to thank my colleagues again because especially the facilities and guards and art handlers who really helped me navigate, as a new staff member in a museum, how to work in an institution, because normally I would just work through the night, which I could not do in this instance. But I had about a few hours of work left to do, but not in the day. And my supervisor said, well, it's not like you'll be fired, but this would follow you around for a while if you didn't make this deadline. Like, got it. So I said, can I take them to my studio? She said, yes. So we got a property pass and took these to my studio where I could do the final patina on these frames and then allow them to dry with the rest of the night, which wasn't much. But I stayed up through the night. I think the final day I worked a 27-hour day to get these done. Arriving at the museum at about 7:30, where they were installed by 8, and on display. And then the exhibition, the press event. There's a picture of me somewhere in here, just blurry because I'm lack of sleep. But yeah, it was a real test of you know, materials and how they could dry. And the exhibition ended in January, but it was so well received that they decided to, the original plan was to put it back in the baffle, but everyone loved how it unified the front and back paintings together, so that it was more of like a unified object than walking around a wall and seeing another painting and then realizing, oh, that's the back of that. Plus, you can see it a little more clearly from the back. And there she is today. Thank you. Any questions?
Is this on? Okay.
Yes.
I was just curious what you used to tone the gold leaf.
Well, it was a thin shellac and casein paints.
Okay. I also was curious why you used the casein paints for the frame.
Water-based, and they dried really fast.
Oh.
So they're not going to do any kind of off-gassing like a Japan paint or any kind of oil-based toner would, which being inside a bonnet was a real concern, even if we had the time to let this fully dry over weeks. That was a concern. So in instances like this where things are being waterproofed or climate-packed or in a bonnet, yeah, I try to use water-based materials that aren't going to be a problem.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We have one virtual question.
Yes.
They say, this is fantastic. I may have missed this due to a wee audio glitch, but I was wondering if the steel tray set directly against the painting or if there was any material need to have a buffering material.
The steel tray was lined with Velara, quarter-inch. There was a lot of space. That was a big concern about this. I only had about an hour to measure the piece, and I actually fabricated a maquette to scale as best I could with the drawings I took. But we gave about a quarter-inch of space around for Velara, and then there was Velara on the face of the rabbits of both. And then the frames themselves, don't actually touch the painting at all. They hover about 1/16 of an inch over, and that's all kind of kept in shadow. You can kind of see it on the verso because of that extra piece. The rabbit is quite deep on the top and two sides, but for most of it, it's just kind of hidden.
Thank you.
Had you ever done a project like this before with a double-sided frame on a pedestal, or
No.
was this your first stuff?
Yeah, I mean, I've done crazy things before, but nothing like this,
Oh.
and nothing of such importance.
Very, very impressive, very good work.
Thank you.
Will you go back in it sometime and do this sgraffito work, or will you just leave it with the plain black?
I would like to do this graffiti over. We don't have any plans currently to change it, but when that does happen, if given the opportunity, I would love to add the sgraffito to the panel. The frames are fabricated with that in mind. I can actually remove the panel with a little bit of work to just simply remove the panel and maybe do just a little bit of repair in the frame to simply change that and not have to reframe them both. Also, this could be reframed without touching the painting at all, because simply they just click on with two small magnets, just enough force to hold them in place. So, we have the dimensions of the site size. We simply just need to fabricate two new frames, and the frame can be swapped out in about 20 minutes, simply lifting the bonnet up, placing the new frames on without taking it off view at all. Because whenever we take this off view, the public, we get a lot of phone calls, because people come to the gallery to see this painting. So we want to keep it up as much as possible, and now we don't have to touch the painting ever unless we want to. Okay, thank you.
All right, we have one more talk, and that is Anna Jean Hamill from the NEDCC, which is she is the lead preparator and paper conservation technician from the Northeast Document Conservation Center in Andover, Massachusetts. And her talk today is Openable Photo Corners, an improvement on the standard photo corner.
This is Anna Jean Hamill, lead preparator and paper conservation technician at NEDCC, or the Northeast Document Conservation Center in Andover, Massachusetts. I'm here to speak with you about a simple and useful technique, openable photo corners, an improvement on the standard photo corner. While I explain the rationale behind this method, I will show you how I work in the video here, and I will demonstrate 4 different styles of openable corners. Non-adhesive attachments such as photo corners, strip hinges, and Z-trays are useful for matting and framing, as well as in storage and packing applications. These kinds of mounting techniques for works on paper, photographic materials, and other flat objects require the use of appropriate materials like papers, which are acid-free and lignin-free, archival-grade polyester films, and tapes or adhesives that pass the photographic activity test, or PAT. Though we're not adhering anything to the object with these methods, we must still consider that the attachments we use have the potential to cause damage, especially on objects with sensitive exposed surfaces like bare plate photographic materials, and objects with friable media like pastel and charcoal drawings, or objects with degrading iron gall inks. Attachments can be the cause of damage in the form of abrasion, or as a result of any failure that could occur when photo corners fail and drop off their backing board, allowing an artwork to fall from its mount. Also to consider are any adverse reactions that could be caused to a work by our choice of adhesive. Self-adhesive tapes pose a risk of adhesive migration, or could inflict damage on a work if they should fail and fall onto the surface of the piece. For these reasons, we must choose our materials carefully and apply them with careful consideration and attention to detail. With a basic folded paper photo corner, strips of appropriate paper like microchamber are folded at 45-degree angles to create a right-angled, triangle-shaped pocket to secure the four corners of a rectangular object. In a conservation lab setting, these corners are usually taped down with an appropriate tape such as Filmoplast P90, favored for this purpose because it passes the PAT, relative reversibility, and its clean, tidy appearance. To remove these corners, either the tape needs to be removed by the mechanical action of peeling or sliced to release the object within. It is inadvisable to try and remove works without first removing the corners. It is common to find that objects have been removed by bending and pulling the artwork out of corners without first removing them. Doing so can crack and break brittle objects, cause abrasion to the object's surface, and result in the cracking of emulsion layers. This is especially true for photographic materials. When photo corners are removed, the mounts they are attached to are often marred by skinning or slice marks. Depending on the level of perfection required of mounting materials in the collection, it can vary. Window mounts may need to be rehinged to new backing boards or discarded when objects come back from traveling exhibition and are removed from travel enclosures, or when access to the verso of an object is needed by researchers. Because of these factors, openable photo corners are an improvement on the basic folded photo corner. Objects can be easily removed without a knife and without peeling away tapes. Backing boards remain undamaged, and mats can potentially be reused over and over again with the same sized objects as with gallery rotations for works on paper. This has the potential to save time and materials. Objects could be safer when people with access to the collection, like researchers and curatorial staff, are not tempted to break open photo corners on their own to gain access to the verso of an object. Openable photo corners are made from longer strips of paper which can be folded up and placed over the corner of a work on paper and then later unfolded to release the work. This attachment is very useful with collections of prints and photographs and with pieces which may be matted for exhibition multiple times. There's more than one way to accomplish this. Fold paper photo corners by diagonally folding strips of paper 2 times so that the fold lines intersect in the center, creating a pocket. Fold a square piece of paper diagonally 2 times so that the fold lines intersect in the center, then unfold and choose a triangle to be the face of the photo corner. Fold in the triangle sections next to the face, between the face and the back side, and flatten. This method is more useful for packing than matting and framing because of the seam that exists on the center interior of the corner pocket. Carefully place the object on its backing board and weight it in place. Slip the folded paper photo corner over the corners of the object. If the object is to be matted, test the arrangement and overmatting by viewing the object with the window mat in place. If the photo corners are visible inside the mat opening, it may be possible to trim down or notch out a portion of the photo corners to conceal them. Trace the outside edge of the photo corners lightly in pencil and remove the object, or tack the photo corner to the backing board in place lightly with low-tack tape to keep it on its spot. Adhere the bottom portion of the photo corners in place with an appropriate adhesive such as wheat starch paste, Klucel G, or a synthetic acrylic adhesive. Use minimal adhesive and make sure that the adhesive does not extend outside the area where the photo corner is placed. Artwork should not come in contact with the adhesive even when it's dry. Work as cleanly and precisely as possible. The top flap of the openable photo corners can be held down by a window mat or cover sheet. Prepared and folded photo corners can be flattened in a heat press by ironing or other flattening method prior to attachment for maximum flatness. The top section of photo corners, which have been notched out, can be tucked into a slit in the lower corresponding section if the material allows. I know it can be hard to change the way you've been working, especially if you've been working in a certain way for a long time, but I really hope you'll give these openable corners a try and see how well they can work. Thanks so much for listening, and I hope you'll get in touch and let me know how this method is working for you, or if you have any other ideas or tricks that can be incorporated with this attachment technique.
Thank you, Anna Jean. Would you like to come up for questions? I love those photo corners. They're really great. I've used the system. The NEDCC also is a great resource. So thanks.
Wow, all you guys were incredibly hard acts to follow, but I'm happy to be here. Any questions?
We have one virtual comment, which is just awesome, it says. And then there's another question that, well, it says, the video that you made was so appreciated. That technique of showing us what you did was really great. And can you share your decision-making process for using one of the adhesives over another? It's probably a big question.
Yeah, well, I usually use wheat starch paste. I'm in a paper conservation lab, and that's my top choice for anything. But if I'm packing works on paper to travel, maybe like a whole bunch of wrapped works that are going to be attached to boards and layered and shipped out, then I might use something a little beefier like PVA. But I really wouldn't want to use the PVA in like a sealed package or any kind of permanent enclosure. But for packing and shipping applications, it's pretty handy and easy to work with. And the drying time is pretty quick, but PVA needs significant time to cure and off-gas, like 3 weeks. So you really need to plan ahead and make your trays and attach your corners well ahead of time. Give yourself time for the curing. We use wheat starch paste all the time. I find it easy to work with. And we cook like 2 quarts of paste a week in the lab we work in, so we have lots on hand.
Thank you. There's just one more comment. It says, I'd like to ask if she's doing any workshops.
Oh, yeah. You know, I had this big hinging workshop planned over COVID, and it got delayed. But pretty soon we're going to be scheduling the Japanese paper hinging workshop again, which is in person at the center in Massachusetts. We also have plans in the future for some non-adhesive attachment virtual workshops. So things like strip hinges and these corners and other techniques to attach works without gluing or adhering anything to the objects, which I'm a really big fan of. I think whenever possible, we should strive not to use adhesive attachments. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks to all of our, well, we've gone into the afternoon, but our morning presenters. So we're going to break for lunch, but there are 2, I think, is it called the Garden Market Cafe? The Garden Market Cafe, which is underneath Special X. So everything's that way. So you'll go up the stairs, and there's the entry pavilion. Go through that. There's a coffee cart that has food. And there's a coffee cart on the right, to your right, that also has food. I think that one's open. And then the Garden Market Cafe is beyond that, and it's down, correct, BJ? Yeah, down the stairs, underneath Special X. Can we start a little bit after 1, do you think? Maybe 1:15? I don't know what time it is. I left my phone sitting. Oh, it's 12:30. Well, if you can try to get back here by 1:15, that would be perfect. Do the PM presenters need to come up to see how let's have the PM presenters come up, and then you can see And we'll see you back here at 1:15. Thank you, and thank you, virtual folks.